Well, I also had the pleasure of meeting with John Laird last Friday, and I reiterate what Red said. I told him the same thing I believe that Red said, the importance of our water recycling project, and he was very impressed and kept nodding his head. Good move. The announcement that I wanted to make is about the Morro Bay Open Space Alliance. If you may remember, a little over a year ago, the city bought Cerrito Peak because it was due to be sold to a developer, and with the explicit understanding that we would like to see a nonprofit group pay the city back. And the Morro Bay Open Space Alliance has stepped up to the plate, and they are currently raising money for that project to help pay the city back. And on Saturday, September 22nd, they're having a community party at Cerrito Peak from 2 to 5. And if you haven't been to Cerrito Peak, this will be your opportunity. You can climb to the top, and the view from up there is fabulous. There will be food, there will be entertainment, there will be booths, so I encourage everybody to come out. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think that concludes our announcements. Our city manager, Scott, you have some announcements on office hours?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. City Council, Scott Collins, City Manager. Just wanted to put out there that we have 2 office hours remaining for the wharf rates and project discussion. We held one last week at Delmar Park and had good attendance from community members and really good discussions. And we will have one this Thursday at 8 to 11 a.m. at the North Point parking lot, not 8 to 11 p.m. as we had identified in our mailer. Apologies for that. And that location is at the end of Toro Lane off of Yerba Buena, at the very north point of Morro Bay. We hope to meet and talk with folks there. And then next Wednesday, September 5th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., we'll be on the corner of Morro Bay Boulevard and Main Street.
Okay, great. And next up, so folks, we do have speaker slips in the back, on the table in the back. And so as always, would appreciate for those who'd like to speak at any item on the agenda tonight, if you could fill out a speaker slip, and there's a slot on top you can fill out if it's for public comment, which is items, first one up on the agenda, that's items not on the agenda. Then we have public comment, pardon me, for our consent agenda, and public comment for all of our business items C1, 2, and 3, for those specific items. I appreciate it if you can fill those out and bring them up to Dana, and she'll help us with that. Next up on the agenda is presentations, and this is an Open Gov presentation by our Finance Director, Jen Calloway.
Hello, good evening. Thank you. First, I wanted to take a moment and recognize Val Webb. She's our senior accounting technician. She's going to drive the portal over there for us. But Val spent a lot of time uploading the data and kind of taking this on as a project. So thanks to Val, and thanks for being here tonight to demonstrate the portal for us. OpenGov is now live and active and available to the public. It's kind of a soft deployment at this point. There's still a few things we're going to clean up and fix, but we wanted to make it available so the public can start looking at it. And we encourage everybody to submit comments or feedback on things if there's specific reports or views that they'd like saved, and we can work forward in getting those on the portal for everybody. We also shared and demonstrated this with the Citizen Finance Advisory Committee for the last 2 months, and they've had an opportunity to work through the site and provide feedback as well. So we hope that this is useful for both the community and even the staff at the city that may not have access to our financial system. To access the portal, you simply go to our homepage. On the left-hand side, down in the banner, there's a OpenGov selection that you choose, and that will take us to the launch page that we've set up. The video that's right there, that is a video. You just click on that. It doesn't play very well for those at home, so we won't play it for this. It's a kind of tutorial of how to work through the OpenGov platform. This one is using a mythical city. It's Cloud City, USA. We'll customize one and do one for the city of Morro Bay, but this will get people started, at least initially. And as you scroll down through this launch page, we have some information on the city, and using OpenGov. Down below the portal reports there's some kind of helpful tips in navigating through what each of the reports is, or the different kind of graphs that you can view the data on. Under that, there's some additional help with some frequently asked questions, some downloads that you can, or some pages you can print on helping you navigate through the reports. We wanted to provide as much information as possible to the community to help you maximize the benefit of this portal. If we go back to our page, to access the portal, there's two ways you can do that. Under the section right here, there's various reports that kind of scan through. If you see one in particular that you're interested in, you can just click on it, and it will take you directly to that report in the portal, which Val's going to demonstrate. Hopefully our internet will hold in. It's a lot of information, so if it does take a while to upload, we've got 6 years of data in there at this point, so a significant amount of data to upload on here. This was the transactions report, it looks like, and you can sort through by funds. Over on the right-hand side is a list of departments and funds that you can sort by if you're interested. So, if Val clicks on the fire department, for example, that will bring up the transactions for the fire department once they load. And then you can see in the grid report below the graph is some of the detail behind those, and you can sort in a variety of different ways. Alternatively, you can also access the portal and go to the home page. And there's a link for that on the site right above there. If you click on that link, it'll take you to the home page, and we've saved some views for the community to kind of be able to easily access some of the things that we thought would be of most value. There's a report for the wharf project. There's a report for vendor transactions and details. And hopefully it's going to pull up here for us to see. In these reports, you can sort by a particular vendor. If there's some vendor you're particularly interested in what payments we've made to, you can do that. It gives you the date of when the last update was up in the corner. So you can see this was updated on August 21st. Over in the right-hand corner, there's a help feature. If you click on that, there's a couple different options on how to, some information on fund accounting in case people aren't familiar with that and how the different funds work. And there's a contact the City of Morro Bay, and you can submit questions or comments via email through that mechanism, as well as emailing staff directly. If we go out of there and down at the bottom, on the side there, you see the custom reports. We have the annual report, transactions, monthly reports, balance sheet, vendor detail, and the wharf project. If we are in the annual transactions report, Val will demonstrate, I think, a little bit here. We can sort by fund over in the filters feature. So if we wanted to look specifically at Measure Q, we would just unselect all of the funds, scroll down and look for the sales tax and transaction Measure Q report, select that. You can further sort that by department. So we know Measure Q helps to fund the fire department, for example, and she can select just the fire department, and we can see how much Measure Q money was allocated to the fire department in any particular year. And the solid lines are the actuals, the hashtag lines are budget. So that's helpful to know. Also, if Val clicks on any of the years down below the graph, like 17, 18, under actual, it'll sort by month. And it will give you the detail for the month. As you hover over the various columns, it gives you total amounts. So there's actually quite a bit that you can, quite a bit of information that you can get out of this portal, and it's worth spending some time to play around with it and really kind of make it work for you. You can also save views. If you generate reports, you can save those, so you'll be able to go there frequently. You can share them with somebody if you're interested in sending to another resident via email, Facebook, etc. You can also download into a spreadsheet if you want to kind of do your own manipulation and sorting of the figures or have a hard copy. Some of the other reports, the vendor detail report, that's where you can really get some information on all of the vendors we use and the payments that go out to those vendors. Again, we have about 5-6 years of information in here, so it's quite a bit. You can sort by a vendor, so that's if you go down to the grid line, for example, and you hover over vendor name. If you are interested in any of those vendors, and I have pretty bad eyesight, so I'm just going to let Val pick one because I can't read them from that far. So the gas company, you just select that and it'll pull up all of the expenses and payments we made to the gas company. So you can do that for any vendor. You can also type in a name if you know of one in particular. So she could go up to the arrow under vendor and type in Office Depot, for example, and it would pull up all of she'll have to clear this one first and then type in Office Depot, and it should pull up all of the transactions for that vendor. There's a description there that's on the side. If you need to, you can expand those columns depending on how much description is in there if you can't read them all. There's check number, invoice number, and the date. So all of the information is right there and accessible for everybody. When we get to personnel information, we've clumped that as a total in terms of salary and then benefits, rather than providing individual employee names and that kind of detail in there. So you won't get quite as much detail behind the personnel costs. It's available in our finance system, but we didn't upload it that way for OpenGov. And then lastly, the WARF project report. This one you can specifically pull up all the transactions that occurred for the wharf. This is a good example of the personnel. If Val clicks on the blue personnel, the dark blue personnel side, it gives you the breakout between benefits and labor cost applied, which is our salary and benefit component to the wharf. If we go to the back feature, we can pull up the operating expenses, and it's similar. You just kind of click on the light blue section, and it will pull up the detail of those expenses by the different categories. If you want the detail of what's in those categories under the grid, you just have to go down to vendor details, and that's where you'll be able to pull up and search by the vendor that we use, the amount specifically, any of that detailed information that you may want. I would point out and acknowledge that this is a snapshot in time. We aren't utilizing the integration feature at this point, so the information is only as good as when we last updated it. That's particularly important for this time of the year as we're doing year-end audit entries. They flow in a very specific process, so a lot of our transfers for year-end aren't done yet because we're still receiving invoices for work that happened as of June 30th. So the numbers, especially for 17, 18, will change from today today to even tomorrow if we were to update tomorrow. So I do want to point that out and acknowledge that we would be able to, of course, explain any of those differences, but don't be surprised if you look at it one day and there's an upload and those numbers do change. That's to be expected. Let's see, under views for some of the reports, there's a lot of different views. Like under the annual report, you'll see there's a variety of different views on the left-hand column that are designed to make it easier for you. You select one of those and it will bring up that view automatically. And there's a variety of different charts depending on really what you're looking at and how you like to visualize it. At the top right hand side, you can select different chart options. So that's really that's our demonstration. We do hope it's useful, and again, encourage any feedback and suggestions people may have in terms of how to make it more useful. We are going to try to work with the library and see if we can coordinate a training in one of their rooms that has computers and offer some office hours to the public to come in and have some hands-on training and go through some individual questions. We don't have that set up yet, but once we do, we'll notice that on our homepage and with the city manager's report update and all of the social media applications that we have. And again, thanks to Val for all of her work in getting this up and going. Oh, and also thank you to Janine, who did our launch pad, and she just did it today and was very quick in doing that. So appreciate her time with that.
All right. Thanks for that great presentation. Thanks for your staff, Val, for coming out, and everybody in the building. Any questions or comments from council? Red, Matt, Arliss?
I just want to express my thanks. It's just fabulous. And I know the community has asked for this kind of information, and now they've got it. And so I do hope they use it and give you some feedback. So thank you.
All right, great. Thanks again, Jen and Val. You all are great. I know you've worked real hard at that, so it's great to have it. Thanks. And with that, we'll move on to the next part of our agenda. So I've got, I'm organizing the public comment slip, so I just have some questions because we have our regular public comment, and then I have some public comment slips where people are saying they want to speak to item C1, but during regular public comment period. I just want to make sure I have that. I've got some speaker slips for items C1 and 2, and I've got comments for during regular public comment. Okay, and that. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. So I'll go through regular public comment, and at the end, I'll pull the cards speaker cards for those people who want to speak to items C1 and 2 that can't stay later on. So with that, we'll start off, and as always with a public comment period, we usually start off with a business spot, but Jan Goldman wasn't here to help us with that, but we do have a special guest, and we want to invite Dr. Jill Stearns. She is our new superintendent and president of Cuesta College. And if you can come up and introduce yourself, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Irons and council members. I did just want to take a minute to introduce myself as the new superintendent president at Cuesta College and let you know that we are actually already in session. Fall launched for us on August 13th, but one of the changes at Cuesta is we now have multiple start dates throughout the semester. So we had classes that began on Monday and Tuesday. We have classes that begin next week and all the way through October. So we are becoming more flexible and ready to meet the needs of individuals whose lives don't always line up exactly with two start dates in an academic year, and providing more access to higher education through some flexibility. I am excited to be partnering and working closely with Morro Bay High School with our dual enrollment program, and we continue to see growth in that area. And this year, we have more than 1,000 Promise students from San Luis Obispo County high schools that are taking advantage for the first time of 2 years fee-free. And that is an increase of about 22% above where we were last year. And so adding that second year of the Promise through the great support of our foundation is really making a difference for our local students. I look forward to working with you and having an opportunity to meet with City Manager Collins soon. And I just want to say a special thank you to our board chair, Dr. Barbara George, who joined me this evening. Thank you.
Thank you both. Dr. Stearns, welcome. And with that, we'll move on to our regular public comment. First up, John Weiss. And then Janice Wolf.
Good evening. My name is John Weiss. I'm a resident and small business owner in Morro Bay. I want to offer a quote also of John McCain, one of our American heroes who recently passed. He quoted and said, "We are Americans first, Americans last, Americans always. Let us argue our differences, but remember we are not enemies, but comrades in a war against a real enemy, and take courage from the knowledge that our military superiority is matched only by the superiority of our ideals and our unconquerable love for them." Senator John McCain. At the last meeting, it was suggested that the 2015-218 was only a water rate increase. But with all due respect, it was also a funding source for a $75 million joint sewer project with Cayucas. The cost was to include pipes, etc. Since starting down this journey, as you may know, I'm a candidate for mayor. I've been amazed by the support for my candidacy. The willingness of all sides to talk to me. I'm listening and learning. I'm concerned about the past decisions made by this council. I'm certain that there are viable solutions ahead, and I hope to lead some of them. I'm dismayed by the avoidable souring of the relationship with our partner Cayucas, so that we are now facing with paying 100% of our project, which, depending on what numbers you use, is approximately $100 million higher than it was in 2012. After meeting with staff last week, I understand that a reduction of $41 million of the $126 million project would negate the need for another 218. There is no doubt we need to do something, but we need to consider being affordable and considerate of our community. If we as a city are going to promote fiscal responsibility, we need to be consistent in describing our expenses. When we know that the costs are not reasonable, we need to do something instead of ignoring it. I want to honor the character of the community I have grown to appreciate, to offer solutions with integrity. Our current sewer enterprise fund has about $10 million, and we are netting about $4.9 million a year. We need to be honest and reasonable and responsible with our finances. Now is the time to show that integrity. I would like to comment that in Cayucas there are 3 water companies, not one. And while we can discuss and perhaps have a debate about that, the fact remains that Cayucas has a $25 million project. They have 2,250 sewer users, which works out to 11,161. I thank you for your consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Janice Wolf. Welcome, Janice.
Good evening. My name is Janice Wolf, and I'm a resident of Los Osos, but tonight I'm here representing the Healthy Communities Work Group, a group of community members and volunteers representing various organizations including Public Health, the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, the Air Pollution Control District, the Health Commission, Environmental Health, the City of SLO Planning Commission, the County Planning Department, Caltrans, Home Share, CapSLO, and Cal Poly City and Regional Planning. Healthy Communities is a subcommittee of Heal Slow, the County Obesity Prevention Coalition, whose mission is to increase healthy eating and regular physical activity through policy, behavioral, and environmental changes. Healthy Communities has been meeting since 2012, and our focus is the impact of the built environment on health. Our group reviews proposed land development projects that come into county planning, commenting on the health impacts we identify. In recent years, our group has also begun collaborating with local jurisdictions, providing comments on proposed projects and general plan updates. Safe, affordable, adequate housing is the cornerstone of a healthy community. Housing enables people to build roots in the community, to get to know their neighbors, build a social network of support, and become civically engaged. When housing is not affordable and stable, people are often forced to choose between paying rent or other expenses such as food or medical care. On Thursday, October 4th, from 1 to 6 p.m., Healthy Communities will be hosting a free community workshop, Health and Housing, Building the Connection. This event will be held at the Vets Hall in San Luis Obispo, and our keynote speaker will be Allison Albee from Change Lab Solutions. Her talk is titled Under One Roof, How Comprehensive Healthy Housing Strategies Improve Health Outcomes. A local panel will follow, and the event will include a reception and time to mingle. I'm here today to encourage the council members to attend this event along with any other audience members who are interested. I have some flyers to distribute with information about registering, and we encourage you to please register. It is a free event, but we would like to know how many people are coming. And if you would like me to send an electronic version, I can do that if you provide emails. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. And if you have the flyers and you can leave them up here, that would be great.
Yep.
Appreciate that. Next up, Mary Gerlich.
Good evening, Mayor Arns and members of the City Council. My name is Mary, also known as Ginny Gorelick, and I've been a homeowner in Morro Bay for the past 7 years. I'm here tonight to express my support for the wharf project at the proposed site and my gratitude for all that you and your staff have done to keep the project on track and the existing plant running well beyond its useful life. I wish the wharf had been built 25 years ago when the cost for it would have been far less. Instead, the city now has to spend over $1 million annually to operate and maintain an ancient wastewater treatment plant. And with each passing year, the cost to build a new plant goes up. Construction cost inflation is now running a little over 4% a year on the Central Coast, and elsewhere it's even higher. Meanwhile, interest rates are also going up. The city has studied, restudied, and evaluated nearly 20 candidate sites for the wharf over the past 5 years. I support the City Council's preference for the South Bay site because I think it poses the least amount of risks in terms of having a new plant up and running soon. This site avoids coastal hazards and neighborhoods and is supported by the California Coastal Commission and the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, two agencies that can either facilitate or stall the permitting process for the project. If the community supports the site, the proposed surcharge for the average single-family household would be $41 per month. Last year, Morro Bay was one of only 12 entities nationwide that was invited by EPA to submit an application for a low-interest loan through its newly created Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act program. This means that Morro Bay is set to receive a loan of more than $50 million with an interest rate of approximately 3% for 35 years. But if the proposed project is scrapped, it's highly unlikely that the city will be offered another opportunity to finance it through the low-interest WIFIA loan. That's because there is much more competition now for WIFIA loans, and there's not enough funds available to meet demand. According to EPA's estimate, over $743 billion is needed for water infrastructure improvements across the United States. I don't know what's going to happen with the 218 protest process, but I do know that some of the people in the audience tonight are not supportive of this project and are encouraging others to vote against it. So here's what I propose instead. Rather than working at cross purposes, I suggest that we channel our collective energy toward finding grants for this project to reduce water and wastewater rates down the road. I know there are money trees out there, including foundations and nonprofits, which support innovative projects located in unspoiled areas such as Morro Bay. With additional funding, the city could expand its utility discount program. I hope that my comments will encourage people who may be on the fence regarding the 218 protest process to join me in supporting the wharf at the proposed site. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Jenny. Next up, Don Addis.
Good evening. I'm Dawn Addis, and I'm a member of CFAC and a candidate for City Council. And I actually came tonight just to say thank you to Ms. Calloway and the Finance Department for their hard work on OpenGov, and to the City Council. I know that the public-friendly budget as a focus has been in the ethers for a long time. There's been some concrete work by a few subcommittees on that, and having OpenGov finally available for the public, I think, is the best iteration yet of getting the public to be able to have access to the budget in a friendly way. And I want to encourage folks that are here tonight or that are watching at home to really take a look at OpenGov, because I think it is groundbreaking, really, in terms of the budget. So thank you, Jen, and to city staff and the Finance Department and the Council for putting energy into that.
Thanks, Don. Aaron Oakes.
Thank you, council members and staff. My name is Aaron Oakes of Save Morro Bay. And before I start my remarks, I wanted to give a shout out to the Morro Bay Historical Society for raising money to move the current facility that houses Tog Nazzini's Dockside 3. They need to raise $30,000 to move it, and I wanted to thank one of the members in the audience, Mrs. Jones Solu, for helping to spearhead this effort. I think that we need to try our best to preserve our unique character and charm of Morro Bay as much as we possibly can. And I commend the Morro Bay Historical Society's efforts overall in achieving their mission. So today I wanted to talk about the Proposition 218. So over the past couple of weeks, I tabled outside of Albertsons and Spencer's, and I spoke with several people who still haven't received a notice, the original notice. They still haven't received the postcard announcing the hearing change date. I've spoken to a number of them who told me that they received their notice in Spanish only. And several of them told me they went down to City Hall to get a copy of the hearing notice, but they were turned away. Apparently some of the employees have been saying you can't get a copy. So I commend the efforts of the Citizens for Affordable Living for making copies of those ballots and of the protest letters for residents. I think it's really important to really step up on this 218. When I look at the totality of all the efforts by the city in trying to correct this, I commend the effort to send out this information, but a significant chunk of our population still hasn't received any information about this process. And so to me, I feel that this Proposition 218 is not legal because it doesn't satisfy the noticing requirements. And I think that it's important for leaders to admit to their mistakes, but it also takes a strong leader to fix them. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Larry Truesdale.
Greetings, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council and City staff. I am Larry Truesdale and do live in Morro Bay. I am one of the thousands of residents in this city who are disenfranchised by the Proposition 218 proposal tax increase. I do understand it is constitutional to do so, but it truly seems undemocratic to me, particularly when the city could ask its registered voters to approve a sewer rate increase. This would be a truly democratic way to function, while Proposition 218 is resorted to when the facts for a tax increase are weak rather than compelling. Choosing such a path to raise taxes does not instill faith and confidence in our city council and increases the likelihood of a poorly thought out proposal has been put forward. I also firmly believe that when Proposition 218 parcel count is totaled, parcels owned by the city should not be counted in the total. That will artificially inflate the 50% plus one total the protesting parcel owners need to achieve. This is not in the spirit of a 218 protest vote. Furthermore, in the list of parcels, there are numerous parcels called open space, for which there is no single name or address associated with them and no way to reach them by mail. These parcels should be excluded from the total used to reach the 50% number, as they are inaccessible. School district parcels, the Dynergy parcel, should likewise be excluded, as there is no one that can be reached that is a recognized legitimate signature. Lastly, since the protest vote count is such a significant issue for the citizens of the city, I would like to suggest that a citizens vote count oversight committee be established to oversee the actual protest count and to double check any invalidated protests. A properly balanced oversight committee would do much to validate the ultimate decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Glenn Silloway.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council and staff. My name is Glenn Silloway. I'm resident of Morro Bay, and I'm the president of the Historical Society of Morro Bay. I've come here tonight to talk to you about a fun and unifying project. We have recently learned that there is going to be a demolition of that little iconic building down on the Embarcadero at 1219. You all know it. It's been the Thai boat. It's currently Tognazini 3. It started its life many years ago. It was a finicky fish number 2 to a lot of older residents. And we think we need to move it to save it. As Joan says, this is part of our preservation and progress approach. We preserve the boat in order to enable the progress of the new project down there on the Embarcadero. Since this has been leaked into the press and into common knowledge through all kinds of channels, we've gotten feedback from a lot of people that support this project. When I raised the issue of the demolition at a recent Historical Society meeting with 60 people, there were ahs and ohs and disappointment. And when I said that we were going to work to move it, to try to create a new visitor center and a place for the Historical Society to have a small museum, there was applause. Now, that's a self-selected crowd. I get that. But I think that this is going to be a very popular thing to do if we can make it work. The problem is we have until October 15th to make it happen. There's a lot of work that needs to be done between now and then, and we're going to need your help, the city's help and the council's help. We intend and propose to use this as a new visitor center, to move the visitor center down on the Embarcadero where it is best functioning. We hope to find a location somewhere near the current Maritime Museum that's consistent with their mission, and join those things in a synergy that creates a place where all of the traffic that feeds through them all goes to all of those places at once. This could be a very big win for us. The first step is to move it. That's a $30,000 chunk. The next step is to put it into service. That's about a $70,000 chunk. We've been talking with a lot of people about this already, including a building mover, so we know we're in the ballpark on that number. because of a generous gift from Jackie Bodie and her family to the Historical Society, a $10,000 gift in the memory of Jim Bodie and Bud Anderson, we have a good start. With additional pledges, we have almost $20,000 already in hand. We can make this happen, but we're going to need your help. There's a lot of planning, permitting, MOUs, all those kinds of things that have to get done, and we need to work with you in cooperation to do it. The thing is, we need to do it quickly. Because if that building gets torn down on October 15th, and Bob Fowler, the developer, said he's pushing out his time as much as possible, but we'll need to act fast.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joan Solo?
Good evening, Council. Thank you for taking my comment. I am following Glenn Silway. I am a board member with Historical Society Morro Bay, and we are very excited about the possibility of having our very first preservation project here for the Historical Society in Morro Bay. As you know, the general plan is coming before you at a kind of a lickety-split pace at this point. And we have been working with the community on creating a historic preservation ordinance to be included in the overall gamut of ordinances that belong to the city. So hopefully folks won't have to work lickety-split like this in the future. The preservation project, the iconic boat building, the Historic Society is interested in saving the boat building that's located at 1219 Embarcadero Road. The building is scheduled to be demolished through a new project that is approved and permitted by both the city and the California Coastal Commission. So it is already an approved and permitted project. The developer is Bob Fowler, and he is very kind to us and is willing to work with us to preserve the building, to have it moved, with the ultimate goal to have it moved so that he can continue with his project. We have, as a historic society, had a 25-year goal of daylighting the artifacts of our community, to create a historical educational center, to show everyone the rich history and culture of Morro Bay that goes beyond the fishing village, beyond the naval base, and all the way back to our native peoples. The city has had a long-time goal of relocating the visitor center to a visitor-serving location within the city. If you are unfamiliar with the Finicky Fish Boat Building, that is a side view of it, located at 1219 Embarcadero. We have spoke with folks at the Chamber of Commerce, the Harbor Board. Name somebody. I'll let you know that we spoke with them. That's pretty much where we're at right now. It's kind of jaw-dropping to think of all of the people who want to actually help with this project. And many, many residents have come forward. The preservation project, we would like to work with the city and other community partners to create a sense of place and a permanent home for preservation of the building, creating a synergy in the general area of the Triangle Lot, as Glenn mentioned. There are a couple of possible locations down there. After walking with city staff, we feel that there are some locations that may be more supported than others. And the Historical Society believes that the location near another museum would benefit all. And we believe that hopefully the visitor center located near two museums would benefit all as well in terms of economic growth in the community. And we know from previous support from the council that you've past supported these.
Thank you, Joan.
Very quickly, I just want to add that you can donate at historicalmorrobay.org.
Thank you, Joan.
Donate.
Thanks. All right, great. Jeff Heller. Thanks, Joan. You guys are great.
Hi, I'm Jeff Heller, running for City Council. Got my ad in there. You're not going to believe this, but there's actually one thing that Glenn Silway and I actually agree on. And I want to cherish this moment, Glenn, which is saving Dockside 3. I mean, you know, I'm reading the general plan, the draft plan, Morro Bay. It talks about character, it talks about iconic. This restaurant is iconic, maybe not as much as the Rock, but it's iconic as the Anchor at Anchor Park or the boats at Tideland Park. I think it really needs to be saved. Now, if $30,000 is what it takes to move it, Personally, I'm not a big fan of item C2, which is spending another $40,000 for a financial feasibility study on the boat yard or whatever that thing is. I'm not sure that that really makes sense. I never have. Can't we just take that money from the harbor and move Dockside 3 instead of scrambling and raising money to do that? It really is an important, silly, whimsical part of Morro Bay, and I just hate to see it go. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff. Next up, Steve Stevens.
Hi, Steve Stevens, resident of Morro Bay. First of all, again, I just wanted to commend those members of council who take the time to follow up on comments that are made by the citizens at the lectern here. I think it really is something that people ought to be commended for. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be a rare occasion that it happens. It should be that every comment that is made here is responded to respectfully. And so anyway, wanted to comment that. The second thing, I wanted to concur with the previous speakers here. I do think that it would be beneficial that we don't end up with this kind of last minute. I'm sure that, I've been guilty of not being aware of what's been going on previously, and this has been an ongoing process, but how do we end up with this at the last moment with a iconic building being in question? I also do question in terms of highest and best use relative to visitors serving necessarily have to be in that location. If you want it down the Embarcadero, I'm sure that other places could be scouted. So just my comments, and look forward to what happens on September 11th. I do think that it's in everybody's interest to have ballots available. That's my personal opinion when someone comes down and they haven't received a ballot, and I've heard that before. I've heard similar kind of comments. But I do appreciate everybody has made their best effort, and I thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Steve. That concludes all the speaker slips that I had for public comment, the public comment items, but I do have public comment items for folks that wanted to speak to items later on in the agenda. So I kind of organized it that way, and don't panic out there. We're going to get to that. So I just wanted to group them together so we could all hear you at once. So we have Pandora Nash Carner for item C1, because you can't stay here later. And then Mary Ann Stansfield, you'll be after that.
Thank you very much. I am Pandora Nash Carner from Los Osos, but I've had a boat on Morro Bay for 17 years. So, Honorable Mayor, members of the council, and staff, good evening. I'm here to, again, try to look at the big picture of looking at the financial future that Morro Bay has an opportunity to grab if you look beyond the Embarcadero for your city limits. I've owned a boat here for 17 years. I am a U.S. Coast Guard captain. I've got 40,000 miles of offshore sailing. And I have to tell you that every time my boat needs a bottom paint, I have to take it to Ventura. And I don't know if you're boaters, but my boat goes 5 to 7 knots. And that's a 30-hour trip, and the weather can come up in a hurry, and I don't have the power, the steam, or the size to get out of the way, and no place to go. So I'm here again to please lobby, to please consider the big picture of having a good haul-out facility. And I brought you some numbers, and I'm going to leave you some resources. The good news is that you have every capability in the world and the perfect location. For me personally, I could not face another trip going around Point Conception, and I sold my boat this week, and I'm really sad about that. But I'm buying another boat, and I'm buying it in Sydney, British Columbia, because they're a town of 11,672. You're a town of 10,648, according to the census. So they're not much bigger, but they have 2 haul-out facilities. One of them is Phil Brooks Boat Yard. I talked to you about them last year. I have a phone number for you. They have 80 full-time employees and a bunch, they described to me, contractors. The Canoe Cove Marina and Boat Yard has 150 full-time employees. And according to their general manager, and I have their name and phone number for you, he said, quote, in Sydney area, 17,000 people are employed in some form or another in the marine businesses, and our annual revenue is $2.2 billion with a B dollars. Now, they're different than Morro Bay because they really want the marine industry. They really want boaters to come up from Oregon and Washington and get their boats repaired there. And as a boat owner and as people who do boat along this coast, they know there's no choices here. There's no facilities here. There's no help here. If they really need help, they keep going. Minor things, absolutely yes. Big things, no. There's a boat up in Sydney right now. It was described to me it will pay the salary of 3 full-time employees for over a year and support their family because of all of the costs, because they happen to hit the rocks at 25 miles an hour. So I encourage you to follow the vision that you can have.
Thank you. Marianne Stansfield.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council and staff. Thank you for having us here to share our thoughts with you. My name is Mary Ann Stansfield. I live in Atascadero. My company is Mental Marketing, and we work with the City Tourism Marketing Department. But I'm here tonight as a member, as a boat owner and a member of the Morro Bay Yacht Club. We have a slip in the Back Bay Marina, and I'm here to support business items C1 and 2. I support the dry boat storage near the harbor as it is so needed. I'm grateful to be a member of the Morro Bay Yacht Club because we were able to store our boat with them, then moor our boat until we were able to get a very hard-to-find boat slip. Which, side note, I support boat slips with new waterfront construction. But that whole process took 10 years. There's a waiting list for everyone on every level from boatyard to mooring to boat slip. Not everyone is as fortunate to be a member of the club, but more importantly, a marine services facility is desperately needed that supports all the industry here. When we needed to get our boat bottom repainted, which is a recurring event, as Pandora mentioned, we were actually told by someone, because our boat is a 22-foot boat, just to take it out to the sand spit, let the tide go out, and on its side, paint one half, let it dry. When the tide comes in, flip it over and paint the other side. Needless to say, we did not do that. And I don't know if you guys ever find people out there doing that, but I imagine it's not a good thing. So we didn't do that, but we ended up at the current Marine Services outlet, and which can only haul out one boat at a time, cannot service all the sizes of boats that we have here in the community, including our commercial fishing, community here, which is such a big part of our economy. It took about 3 months to get our boat back because they had to keep taking our boat down so they could put in another boat that had an emergency. And so anyway, that goes on and on. There is also no competition from what I understand. They're also soon to close, so that's another issue. Many of our Morro Bay Yacht Club members are not as fortunate and must travel to Santa Barbara, Ventura, or Avila, spending their money at other harbors. In addition, transient boats are often looking for repairs, which is another source of revenue for an accessible marine services facility. As I mentioned before, we also have the needs of our thriving fishing community, which is the heart of our town. I support both items C1 and 2 to keep our marine community healthy and strong. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Marianne. David Hensinger.
Mayor Irons, council members, my name is David Hensinger. I live in San Luis Obispo, and this year I'm the Commodore of the Morro Bay Yacht Club. We have a few other members here. You've heard from some already. The board represents the members, and I'm here to represent the board, and we are strongly in favor of C1 and C2. It's very exciting that you're so close to having a dry storage that's under the C1 proposal. We've had people that have come up who are interested in having boats in the area, and the options are very small. That's a wonderful step forward. And the fact that it's so close is very exciting. And then C2, moving forward to have your request for proposal for the possibility of actually going forward with the workyard, also very exciting. And we're going to hear from other people or you've heard from people already with much better numbers than I have. 200 members, we're very excited about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dana McClish.
Good evening. My name is Dana McClish. I'm a resident and business owner in Morro Bay. I'm also a longtime boating enthusiast, a proud member of Yacht Club, fellow members over there. I'm the founding president of the Morro Bay Youth Sailing Foundation, and I also serve the city on the Harbor Advisory Board. Tonight I would like to address agenda items C1 and C2. Regarding C1, about 2 years ago, the Harbor Advisory Board, along with the other city advisory committees and commissions, we were asked by city staff to come up with income-generating ideas. The Harbor Advisory Board had already been pursuing the possibilities of a boatyard, complete with boat storage as an additional revenue source. So we already had a good idea of possible revenue source. So the Harbor Department has created a comprehensive plan to facilitate a need for trailer boat storage while producing income for the city of Morro Bay. I would ask that you please authorize staff to proceed with this proposal. Secondly, in regard to item C2, the financial feasibility study is a necessary step along the path of implementing a marine services facility. The results will aid the city in understanding the costs and revenue potential a boatyard would provide for our harbor town. The study will also be helpful in seeking grant funding for such a project. As Morro Bay looks to enhance economic diversity beyond tourism, a boatyard would act to revitalize a marine industry and be essential infrastructure of our working waterfront to once again service the whole boating community. After all, the authentic maritime culture is a driving force of tourism worth fostering. I would ask that you continue this process and authorize funding for the request of proposals. Thank you for your time and your thoughtful consideration.
Thanks, Dana. That concludes all the speaker slips for public comment. I'll close public comment, bring it back to council. Thank you. I was going to have one response. There was a comment about city staff for as far as the Prop 218 forms and having those available.
The staff at the front counter are typically the people that the residents are speaking to when they come in. They've all been informed of the process for 218. They offer information on the material that needs to be on any piece of paper. It does not need to be on a city form. You can submit a handwritten protest as long as it has, it's valid with the date that you're protesting the water and the sewer increase. It's signed. That information is provided to customers when they come in. With respect to if a customer's has said that they did not receive a protest, we'd like to be able to look that up and ensure that we did mail them a protest. So that's why we're not just leaving ballots, if you will, at the front counter. Also, we want the customers to read the actual notice and understand what we're protesting. So we don't want to necessarily leave a stack there. But everybody's welcome to submit a protest in one form or another, as long as it has the qualifying information.
Thanks, Jen. Anything else from public comment?
Yes, I think Mr. Truesdale raised the issue of the 218 process as being inappropriate for this, and my understanding is that this is the process that is typically used when you want to raise water and sewer rates. But would you like to speak to that, Chris?
Sure. So this is the procedure that Proposition 218 actually provides for in the California Constitution, that protests can be submitted to the city after a 45-day notice, and that they're then counted at a public hearing, and if a majority of the actual record owners or the fee payers protest, then the fee doesn't pass. If they do, then if they don't, then it does pass. This is all provided for in Article 13D of the California Constitution, and the city has actually gone above and beyond the requirements in the California Constitution and provided in a resolution recently passed by the City Council for procedures to be followed. Resolution 4418 has all of the guidelines and procedures for submission and tabulation of protests in connection with this hearing.
And how are open spaces counted in this? Is a parcel, is it an occupied parcel or an owned parcel, or do we know that, the answer to that question?
The only parcels that wouldn't be counted are those parcels that couldn't be served by sewer.
Okay. All right. And the last issue that I think Mr. Truesdale brought up concerned how we are going to be counting the ballots. And do you want to address that, Scott?
Yeah, great question. We're working with our peers in the local community and throughout California to kind of mine the best practices, understanding that there may be a need to go beyond the count and verification process. So we're working on kind of the final details of that, and if we do get to a verification process, it will definitely be a public, open to the public process. Yeah, and we'll figure out all the guidelines and bring that forward to council.
Right, but the public would be able to observe the counting.
The verification process, definitely.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
And so like I said, we're working out all the details, and we'll make that public as soon as we have it all
Okay,
fleshed out.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Matt?
I do have a question for Dana McClish. Dana, are you going to be staying for this item later for C1 and 2, or are you going to be leaving? And the reason why, if you're going to wait, I'll wait for it because I think you're going to have some important input coming from the Harbor Advisory Board. But if you need to leave, I'd like to ask you now.
Come on up, Dana.
And Jamie, I am very aware of what your point is. But however, Dana, in terms of the past year, a couple of years on Harbor, you've done a lot of studying of various harbor facilities up and down the Central Coast. And in terms of looking at the functional boatyard, C1, and then looking at the different funding that could happen for the future to build a boatyard, could you perhaps speak to this, what you've done as an outreach for the Harbor Board?
Well, we've been working on this for close to 5 years. My observations along the coast are, I've seen yacht clubs that have more facilities than our whole harbor has when it comes to infrastructure of servicing boats. Morro Bay, we have to destroy boats because we can't take them out of the water. They can't be fixed, so then they become derelict, and then they get destroyed. I've seen 50-foot steel boats drug up the launch ramp because the fisherman got too old and neglected it. Then it was too dilapidated to haul down the coast. Engines weren't working. So there's a real need here. And beyond the residents here of the boating community and all the vessels here, we at the yacht club, we probably see about 300 transients a year that come through. And I just talked to a delivery skipper the other day, and I said, yeah, our last boatyard's closing in about a week. And I go, we won't have a boatyard. We won't have here locally. Port St. Louis, yeah, they have a boatyard, and it's maybe a third of the year you could haul and launch there because it's open water. It's not in an inner harbor, which here you could do 7 days a week, anytime, emergency. Lexi Bell from the National Estuary Program is on our ad hoc committee, and she really wants to see this happen because there could be a disaster anytime. Fuel will be in the water if a boat sank, and this is a national estuary, and we're careening boats on the sand spit, and we do a pretty good job at trying to keep them clean, but we just don't have the facilities that we should have for a harbor town.
Could you speak, Dana, and could you explain the difference or the connection with the sporting community, the sailing community, and the commercial fishing community, and how this would, moving forward, help those three?
I'm sorry. I just want to. I want to keep the meeting going to the item, and I appreciate you coming out and keeping this dialogue going. But respectfully, let's keep the item on C1, and we're kind of mismatching the agenda item at hand. So,
C1, right. Okay, the boat storage.
This, and then when we get to C1, we'll go ahead and go through those comments.
Okay, so you just want me to speak on C1 at this moment?
You already have. Our public comments closed.
Okay.
We're kind of out of order in how we're doing this, and I'd like to get back to the regular meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Sorry, Matt. I know we get into a different dialogue going, and we just want to keep it on track. And if we can move on to our next item, appreciate the comments from Dana and everything. Moving on to the next item we have is consent, and we have a public comment item number A9. For Carol Truesdale for public comment. It's the only speaker slip I have for public comment for consent. Seeing none. All right, I'll close public comment for consent, and then I'll ask if there's any items to pull for consent.
I'm not pulling item A7, but I do want to note a correction that should go in the official minutes. And this was the item authorization for the City of Morro Bay's project list for the FY 18-19 for the California State of Good Repair Program. And there were two fiscal amounts cited in the report, and I asked why they were inconsistent, and the answer was they should both say $478. So under fiscal impact, it should read $478 instead of the $540 figure. So if that correction could be made, that'd be great.
For what? State the item again.
A7.
A7.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, A7. I was just going to pull item A5 and A9. And are there any other items? Seeing none, take a motion to approve all items on the agenda with the exception of item A5 and A9 with the corrections as stated by Councilmember McPherson for item A7.
So moved.
Second. Motion by Ms. McPherson, second by Mr. Makuletsky. And Dana, do we need any clarity on those particular comments? We good? Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? None? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries 4-0-1. Got to get it right there. All right, thanks. And then item A5, I just was going to pull that. It is on, just wanted to make a real brief comment on that. I do support the extension, but wanted to acknowledge that we do have the procedure that allows City Council to extend this, and just wanted to support Maggie Jurin for the excused absence, and just appreciated Dana for bringing this forward as well, and just recognize that we have a new policy now that really kind of guides us through this. So I know it's the first time we've had one on consent, but just wanted to speak to that. And unless there's any other comments, I just wanted to speak to that and make a motion to approve item A5 unless there's any other comments.
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion by Mayor Arons, second by Councilmember McPherson. Any other comments? None? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 401. And then item A9, just briefly, just was asking policy-wise why we city manager wasn't authorized to go ahead and approve this allocation, and if maybe we can just briefly discuss that. Thank you.
So the existing contract for the services with SWICA, they're an environmental consulting firm that we use to prepare the mitigated negative declaration for the Panorama tank demolition project. We had several planning commission hearings associated with that project and a lot of input from the public and planning commission, and it required us to revise the document, and so that additional scope increased the amount of money necessary to cover the cost of those environmental services. The existing contract was for $6,834, and our contract language includes a clause that allows us to exceed that by 25%, which is $1,700 and something if I'm doing math in public. But the overall cost to complete the environmental work associated with the finalized project for the tank demolition project ended up exceeding that. And so we had to come back to council to get authorization to exceed that one-time 25% exceedance of the amount of the contract.
And if there's any other changes that we might want to revisit as far as policies, that's something we might consider. I mean, I think it's great that it comes back to us, but at first glance, it was like, it seems like it's within the purview of the allowable.
It is a small amount on the contract side of things. It's the process whereby we have the authority to exceed the initial contract amount by 25%. It's a little odd for this, and probably something we need to look at in revising our contract, requirements, because this is a contract that's actually entirely reimbursable, plus administrative costs. So, having some number set at staff's limitation or city managers even for reimbursable contracts probably makes a lot more sense than just the 25% and having us come back, because the total cost for this contract is a little over $11,000. It's not a large contract.
Yeah, okay, thanks. A couple of reasons for pulling that one in my explanation, and as folks that watch the agendas and look through this, we have a lot of items on consent, and this isn't uncommon to see some sort of contractual amendment come through. This one for about $4,000, maybe small to pull and discuss. We've had larger ones, so I know our viewing audience and others in the community might make comments as to, how we're responding to our fiduciary responsibilities up here. But I just wanted to speak to process-wise and why we're going through this. But thanks for talking through that with us. Sure. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I'd take a motion to approve item A9.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Davis, second by Ms. McPherson. Any further discussion? None. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries 401. Great, and that concludes our consent, and we can move on. Does anybody need a quick break, or would you like to move on to the first item on the agenda, business item? Anybody? Okay, let's move on. First item for up on the business will be item C1, and this is City Council reconsideration of Harbor Advisory Board Council Goal Objective Work Plan element for goal number 1. The objective is to work program element 6 regarding fee-based boat and RV storage in the Triangle parking lot. I was looking over at Eric's chair. He wasn't there. He was working on the PowerPoint. And I was going, well, this is going to be a short staff report. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Rob.
Where'd everybody go? Thank you, Mayor Arns and Council. Apologize for that slight pause there. I'll try to move quickly through my PowerPoint here. So, correct item C1, reconsideration of a fee-based boat storage in the Triangle parking lot, which is the power plant property we acquired from Dynegy a couple of years ago. So our purpose tonight is obtain council approval for a boat dry storage in the Triangle parking lot, including approval of a storage policy, rules and regulations, and agreement documents. Get council authorization for up to $15,000 of expenditure for initial storage yard improvements, and obtain council approval of a new master fee schedule item of $100 a month for boats that want to store their vessels, or people who want to store their vessels in our lot. We're recommending council approve the program as presented, including the program documents, which are included with the staff report, authorization of the $15,000 expenditure for the improvements, and the new master fee schedule item. Of course, we can always elect not to approve this program and direct staff accordingly. Fiscal impacts, approximately 50 spaces at 75% occupancy and $100 a month, which is the rate we're proposing, would generate about $45,000 annually. $12,000 to $15,000 initial expenses for necessary yard infrastructure, which at this point is primarily fencing. This is a Harbor Advisory Board, quote, research and bring to council for consideration goal objective work plan item. Staff has researched and brought policy, rules and regulations, document, storage agreement document to the Harbor Advisory Board over a couple of different meetings for input. We incorporated their input into the draft documents. We brought this to council back on February 13th of this year, and council was supportive, but we wanted, you wanted more things brought back with more direction and analysis on certain aspects. Another recent council direction, which I've incorporated in, was to work with the Harbor Festival on possible locations to relocate their storage yard needs, which they currently have in our storage yard adjacent to the Triangle parking lot. So the draft documents attached to the staff report, number 1 is the storage facility rules and regulations that we drafted. Attachment 2 is the facility agreement terms and conditions. That's the document that folks would sign if they want to store their boat. And item number 3 is our policies and procedures and basically how we would implement the program. Council's February 13th input considered item number A, no RV storage. We initially proposed both boat and RV storage. I think we put a priority on boats, and if there was space left, maybe go to RVs. Council input was we didn't want to see RVs, so paragraph 16 of the rules and regulations prohibits anything other than trailered vessels. And then paragraph 17 of the agreement and terms and conditions also stipulates acknowledgement of folks receiving the rules and regulations and whatnot, so no RVs. Item B was re-examining the revenue split. Back in February, we had proposed an 80%, 20% revenue split, 80% Harbor Fund, 20% General Fund for the $45,000 that would be generated. At that split, it would be about $36,000 and $9,000. Had a fair amount of discussion on the 13th over whether that was a fair sharing, whether it should be 50-50. Further staff analysis or further staff opinion was the lot was acquired with an agreement with the power plant, essentially at no cost to the city. It's a little used, the lot, on a day-to-day basis. It occasionally gets a fair amount of cars in there on big events, especially events that maybe direct people in there, if we can get those events to direct folks in. But for the most part, it's a fairly empty lot, not real used. Although, again, the proposed revenue split was met with some questioning. The general fund should receive some more. What I've kind of analyzed, or the way I look at it, is kind of like the city's waterfront lease sites where the city owns the underlying ground. It's sort of the same here. The Harbor Fund doesn't own this property. I guess it's the city's general fund that owns the property. But it could be akin to one of our lease sites where the city receives 8% of the appraised value of the property, and the city does essentially nothing but allow somebody to build and develop and run a business. So it's not terribly different from that. So using that approach, 8% of the appraised value of the property value that we had assessed back when we acquired that back in 2014, maybe 15. That would be approximately, for about half that lot, would be about $4,100. Of course, the appraised value, I'm sure, has gone up since that was originally appraised, but somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000. Our percent gross on our typical leases for boat wet storage is 10%. So if one of our master leaseholders has slips, the typical percent gross rent attributed to that is 10%. If 10% was applied to the triangle lot, $45,000, that'd be about $4,500 if you want to look at it that way. And then state parks, California state parks, typically in most of their concessions, they take 20% of their revenues from their concessionaires. That's currently what's in our concessionaire agreement with state parks, with the State Park Marina. And if you look at that revenue split, it's what we're presenting or what we're proposing tonight. So that's kind of my analysis on that, and my pitch on that would be, I think 80%, 20% is the proper mix, and a good mix for the general fund, harbor fund. We're also proposing that 30% of the revenues go into major maintenance and repair and upkeep of the lot and infrastructure. That's also kind of akin to our State Park Marina agreement, concessionaire agreement. Associated Pacific has to put 30% of their overall revenues into that dedicated fund for those sorts of things. So in that regard, the $45,000 and an 80%, 20% split, $9,000 would go to the general fund, $13,500 to the maintenance and repair fund, with the remaining $22,500 going to the harbor fund. Our approximate estimated administrative cost that the harbor fund would incur to manage the lot, which would mostly be office administration, billing, and whatnot, signing people up. But there's a little bit of enforcement and oversight from Harbor Patrol that have to be looked at for that. Estimated about $8,000 annually, leaving about $14,500 in excess revenues for the harbor fund. So that's the proposal on that one, item number B. Another council input from the 13th was no subletting allowed. In other words, somebody couldn't lease and then go release it out to somebody else. So in paragraph 12 of the rules and regulations, subletting is prohibited. And other council input on item D was a little more detail on security, lighting, and fences. We're proposing a standard height chain link fence with barbed wire over the topping, combination padlock for the gate entry. Probably 2 gate entries to get in because you need to get a trailer in and out. It gets a little tricky. I've got a graphic coming up a little later that'll demonstrate how that might work. And the fencing would have either plastic or wood slats, those sort of privacy screening they have in there so that you can't see in as much and block it off a little bit. As tenants vacate or evicted, hopefully we don't have too many evictions, the gate combination would be changed to prevent unauthorized access. Over time, as we accumulate revenues in the 30% fund, we could adopt a wireless key card entry system, which has gotten pretty common in marinas up and down the state, that you can turn cards off and on remotely when people come and go. It makes it a little easier to manage. As to lighting, the Harbor Advisory Board recommended some additional lighting any additional lighting be directed to avoid impacts on neighbors. As before, we're not proposing any additional lighting beyond what's ambient coming from the power plant, which there's a fair amount of lighting coming from the power plant. And there is a street light next to the Maritime Museum. There's a light pole there next to the Coast Guard boat as well, so we'd propose to leave it as is. And then further layouts, we did a little more analysis on layout. I had Dana from the ad hoc committee go do some layout work, and that's the graphic I'll give you here in a minute. To really make it work, I'd initially thought we'd take maybe a third of that lot, the eastern third of that lot for this. It looks like it's going to need at least about a half, maybe a little bit more, just mainly for the turnaround factor with trailers. If we were to employ a little dolly or a little powered, they call them mules, to push boats around, we could pack them in there tighter, but at this point I don't think that's a workable solution, at least not a solution we want to get into, because then you got liability issues and training and a machine now you got to maintain. So maybe sometime in the future we'll look at that, but at this point the lot's geometry dictates a little more use of that lot. And then item E for council input from the 13th was relocation alternatives for the front street trash enclosures, and then I'll talk about the Harbor Festival as well a little bit there. The triangle lot, it's a tough location, and maybe I'll go to one of the graphics. The original graphic I had put in on the 13th had this outline, really in the area, oops, where's the laser? Hello, laser. The laser? No. There's the laser. So the trash enclosures are about in this area here. There's 2 sets of fences along here. There's the Dynegy property edging fence, and then about, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 feet, maybe a little more is where our yard property line is. So a lot of real estate was lost in an easement area in there. And if you were to relocate the trash enclosures over into this corner of the triangle lot, it really just puts them on the opposite side. The concern of the council was, with the Maritime Museum putting in the Selenian Native American improvements in through here, and eventually them building out more things in here, it just sort of juxtaposes it right onto the other side. It doesn't really solve the problem because it'll just be on the left side instead of the right side, so that's not a great option in my opinion. There's nowhere really good further to the south because now you got the, AGP. You've got that new hotel going in, closer over there, so that's just going to push the problem over further. Short of requiring them, GAFCO and Harbor Hut, to put it back over on their site, which is, again, a challenge, as we know.
Thank you.
Thanks. Or in an enclosure over in the parking lot across the street. The only possible other viable alternatives may be in the lot back over in the northwest corner. They're still going to have to go across the street and into the lot a little further back. You do need to make it accessible for the trash company. They don't want to be coming out and going into a major enclosure, but as most of our waterfront leaseholders do, they've got their trash enclosures inside something in their building. They have to push it out, and they push it out into the street. You've seen, Wednesdays or Thursday morning, whatever trash day is, they're all pushed out in the street. Trash company doesn't do that. The trash company comes and stabs the dumpster, and then the lease site owners put them back in. And so we could do something akin to that, where GAFCO and Harbor Hut would have to get them out of an enclosure, but it could be somewhere in the northwest corner. It seems about the best alternative, and we can have discussion about it, but there's just not a lot of space for them to put things that are out of sight, out of mind, that what we're looking for. And then maybe when the Maritime Museum builds out to full size, and or the boatyard financial feasibility pencils out and we end up building a boatyard, obviously years down the road, that either of those facilities could potentially build something with GAFCO and Harbor Hut's participation that could house their dumpsters and closures across the street. And then talking to Harbor Festival, personnel and their options, that yard was first chosen primarily because Harbor Festival, as you know, used to be located to the north and right in that zone, and they were in that lot. They took not only the waterside side of the Embarcadero, but they're also in the Front Street parking lot. They morphed out of that, and now they've gone south. Who knows, maybe someday they'll move back to the north, but it was really proximity that they focused in on that yard because they could move, obviously with forklifts on hard packed ground, it was easy for them to move, and they could move things by hand pretty easily because the site was right there. A little more difficult now because they have to go a little further, but still on the waterfront, and they can get forklifts back and forth. Out at our yard, out at the end of the dirt road in Embarcadero by the creek, is going to be a tough one for them because it's a dirt road. It's often very lumpy in the wintertime, although Harbor Festival is in the wintertime. It's not a good road to drive forklifts down, at least not a hard-wheeled forklift, and it would just be a hardship for them. So we've not identified a location. I've started working with Steve Matthew and seeing exactly what their storage needs are. The little building we have down there that they're in, which is maybe 25 by 25, they're pretty full in there. And everything they have in there for the most part needs to be undercover, out of the weather. Everything else is outside, is okay outside. So they could potentially go to some sea trains somewhere, but we haven't found the ideal spot yet. But we're working with them to see if we can find something. So that's the status on those. And then go back to the monthly rental rate. I think we had originally proposed about $91 and change, which matched a master fee schedule item that we already had on the books for our storage that we allow people to do in our yard out at the end of the dirt road. It was based on a more traditional size parking space. Council input was make it a little higher, definitely get it up above what the private sector is, so we're well above that. Private sector is probably in the $75 range, $75, $80 range, so we're recommending $100. And then just see what sort of demand we have and see how quickly it fills, and if we develop a waiting list. Obviously, if we fill up fairly quickly and then develop a waiting list, maybe our rate's too low and we look at resetting it in the springtime when master fee schedule comes around. Or if we have no demand or little demand is lower and we're not filling up what we hope, maybe our rate's a little too high and we rethink it as well. So $100 seems like a good compromise at this point. And then the graphics, again, I've got what we proposed and what I initially thought would be the space required. This is some graphics, and I wish that came out a little more clear. So this is what Dana helped me work up. So here's the boundaries of the triangle lot. You got Maritime Museum back here. There's the, I guess, the building and where the Alma is. The driveway on through here. into the corner, trash enclosures back here, along the edge of the eastern border of the facility, and then along the northern border along with the power plant. This is probably about 62, 63 spaces. We were envisioning 50, so you could cut off maybe 10, so I think it would cut more through the middle of the lot. There may be other configurations that work, but it's still what you run into is turnaround space. As Dana mentioned, we believe there's a fair demand out there for sailboats wanting to leave mast up and be able to come and go from the launch ramp. There's no overhead impediments between here and the launch ramp. The impediment we have in here is a pretty high KV line running across that we'd have to make sure, darn sure that our sailboat folks are well advised of what's there and put some sort of physical barrier in that could either make noise or physically stop them if they ended up trying to drive across, because we'd still have to allow access over onto the northern side of this property. So that's, from a safety standpoint, that's our biggest concern, but I think we'd be able to alleviate that with training and some physical barriers that keep sailboat people from going across that way. So again, we recommend we pursue establishing this lot, about 50 spaces, with the documents we've provided, master fee schedule item approval, and then approval of $15,000, up to $15,000 to put in the fencing and gating. And we'd put, what we're proposing for the revenues is the first part of the revenues would go back into our Harbor Accumulation Fund, and made whole before any of the revenues went anywhere, Harbor Fund, General Fund, to at least recoup our expenditures putting it into it, and then start dividing the revenues up along the lines that we're recommending. And with that, if we have any questions, comments?
Questions? Red, you want to start off on questions, and then we'll just work this way.
Yes, thank you. And Eric was kind enough to spend time with me yesterday morning at the site looking at various issues and questions that I had. Regarding the trash enclosures, how much revenue does the city receive from the users?
A whopping about $32 per month. It too was based on that appraised value of the triangle lot next door, and you calculate out the square footage, and we calculated it on that.
All right. And do all of the other water lease holders, other than GAFCO and Harbor Hut, store their own trash in trash receptacles on their leased property?
Yes, but I'm going to qualify that with a hesitant yes. I'm just in my mind going north to south, and I hate to throw somebody in the bus, but the Coast Guard doesn't. They don't have it within their building to store it, so they're their trash enclosures kind of out in the parking lot. But everybody else, Tognazzini's got an enclosure next to their building. They take care of their trash. Morro Bay Landing the same. Then you got Harbor Hut, GAFCO, and then as you move on down, I mean, some of them are outside-ish. I think House of Juju right now is currently around the backside, but once they do their project, which they're getting pretty close to moving on, it'll be inside, and then you move on down. Everybody else keeps them enclosed except for trash day, yes.
And the two businesses who are using the enclosures, they built the enclosures that are around the receptacles at their own expense, is that correct?
Correct. I think we contracted with the Saskatoon Fence or whatever the company was to build them, and then they reimbursed us. That was probably back in about 2000, well, whenever the Harbor Walk was built through there, 2007, 8 maybe. So they did pay for it, yes.
Okay. And I noticed that just about every time I happen to look over there when I'm passing by, there's at least one gate open. There's trash on the ground. There are some of the tops are open and the gulls are getting in. What kind of enforcement do we have to keep those clean? And is it sufficient to do the job?
Well, ultimately, our biggest hammer is default and termination of those, I think our license agreements. I think we've got them on license agreements, not lease agreements. Default and termination of those agreements. I agree with you. I think it's a combination of management from those sites and how much
attention their employees put into it, and partially the trash company. They're not, they come and flip the cans over and put them back. Sometimes the lids will stay open, sometimes the lids will close, sometimes they'll close the gates, sometimes not. I mean, it's a combination, but it is a constant management issue for us as well. And we've often, I think we've written them up a couple of times. I guess we could pursue a littering kind of administrative citation route as well, for leaving, when they leave things open, allow things to accumulate. I think they probably a next best alternative would be to require them to put enclosure over the top to keep for the public from being able to get in there, because some of their problem is the public, like all of our trash enclosures we have. You have a trash enclosure out there, a trash dumpster, and there's certain people in the public that want to take advantage of that and use that and just leave things. So if they put an enclosure over the top and locked it up, and just like our regular leaseholds, and I'll just use Smith Held at the Harbor Center where Hofbrau is. One of his employees has got to unlock a door, roll it up, push the trash can out, roll it back when it's emptied, close it back up. And so it takes some time and effort on their part, and we could require them to do that. And that's probably would be a next step on the enforcement sort of protocol or continuum to see if we can get them to do a little better at it. And then if they don't, then like I say, threat of cancellation of the thing altogether would be the next one.
Okay. Those sound like good recommendations. Regarding the Harbor Festival storage, I know that I and the rest of council recommended that we look at relocating. But after I looked at the site yesterday, I'm not sure what we would gain by doing that, because we still have a yard in there, and if we ask them to move their stuff out, we would still have an empty yard. So what do you feel we would gain by moving the Harbor Festival to another location?
Well, until we have a plan or something that we want to do with that yard, I don't know that you gain anything. The lift station is going to stay there forever. Our oil storage facility, as we discussed, I think maybe at some point if we build a real true-size boatyard, it would be naturally incorporated into that. That would make a total common sense move for that. But until that happens, that's a good central location for it, for both the boaters and us to get to it. And it's a fairly new facility, and it serves its purpose well, being in that reused ferrous chloride containment area. So those facilities are lift station definitely permanent. I would recommend we don't go moving our oil storage yard unless we had a better use or something we wanted to do in there. So that's going to stay. The small building could potentially go, and they could, like say, move into sea trains. But unless we have a use for that yard or a plan for that yard, sending them elsewhere at this point, I don't see anything to gain yet.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, Matt?
Yes, Eric, I have a question about, in terms of when you talk about the $15,000 cost for doing the various fencing improvements and lights, does that include, or would that include any sort of change to the ground, being that it's gravel in there, getting the boats in there, was that suitable? Would that have to be worked on?
No, I think the ground's fine. At some point, I want to say last year, maybe year before, Public Works had a big excess of gravel from several, I think, paving and street projects that they ended up going in there and spreading it. And we had, in some areas, 4 or 5 inches of pea gravel that became an entrapment problem for big vehicles that would go in there. I think they've moved it around and moved the big thick parts mostly to the edges, and I think the rest has worked in pretty well. So shouldn't be an issue, although we might have to get Walt out there and do a little bit of pushing around. Other than moving the barrier, the pilings we have spread through there for parking, that's about the only improvements I think we need to do. I think we would, in fact, I would intend to just put down chalk stripes to begin with to get people lined up. Assuming we get pretty good occupancy, once you get people in there, they're naturally just going to line up
along the lines of next to the next guy, and not everybody vacates at once and comes back at once. So it'll kind of self-police in that regard. So we're going to be pretty minimum on improvements.
Also, in terms of size of the vessel that could get in there, especially with that overhead wires in there, that's going to limit, especially masts staying up. So in terms of, and I know, and on the Harbor Board, they've talked about getting that wire with the Maritime Museum put underground, but that's still going to be a good amount of money to do that. So of those 50 boats you're saying could fit in there, do you have a size idea, or you just have to wait to see what comes?
We'll have to wait to see what comes. I mean, typically, about the biggest boat you're going to see on a trailer is 28 to 30 feet, because as soon as you get beyond that, you're getting beyond 9 feet wide, and that takes special Caltrans permits. Even a 9-foot wide boat, you've got to have a wide load placards and certain other things on your trailer, which not a lot of people have. So it kind of self-limits in that regard. You're right about the sailboats, and they're typically the trailered sailboats that are going to come and go are going to be 30 feet and under for the most part. The wire, yes. In fact, I was just down with Larry the other day, and he had a number from PG&E, and I want to say it was $30,000 to put that wire in the ground. He had talked to the PG&E fellow, and they weren't even sure what it served. It might have only be serving the Marine Mammal Center, which doesn't need whatever the number is, 24 kV or some gigantic amount of juice. So it's something to look at, but it would need to be undergrounded. There's the occasional commercial fishing boat, salmon boats that may want to store in there that may want to keep their salmon gear up, their trolling gear up, outriggers up. I don't think any of them would be as tall as those wires, but that would be something we'd have to consider if we got a commercial guy and keep them on the other side of the wire. But for the most part, even a boat, even if you had a 30-foot sport fishing boat, and even if he had all his antennas up, he's not going to come anywhere near those wires. They're pretty high.
Okay, and in terms of that, that's a good segue. In terms of the amount of boats in there you have now, I don't think you have, 3 or 4 boats that are doing it now. Would you open up a number of commercial slips and a designated commercial, or you just want to wait and see who signs up first? I
think we just wait and see. We're giving priority to commercial boats, commercial fishing boats, and Morro Bay residents. I think Morro Bay commercial fishermen, number 1, commercial fishermen, number 2, and then back to the general public. I don't suspect we're going to fill up with a ton of commercial fishing boats, maybe seasonally, but there's not going to be a lot. We'll see how it goes. Maybe end up with 10. We'll see.
Thank you. All right, Matt. Marlis.
Thank you. All right. Well, Eric was kind enough to meet with me also yesterday, so he answered some of my questions, but for the sake of the public, I'll ask some of them again. Let me follow up with Matt's question. How would you intend to advertise this service? How are you going to reach boat owners and let them know that this storage is now available?
Well, we'll Facebook it. We'll use everybody's favorite advertising place now, Craigslist, which is where most people, I mean, if you want to go find a slip, almost everybody goes to Craigslist now. Boat for sale, Craigslist, we'll put it there. Put it in our office, we'll put it out in our billings. Probably put a sign of some sort or something down at the launch ramp at our little pay kiosk, maybe a little informational notice there. We'll spread the word around.
Okay. And this was a question that I asked you. Would you also want to be stepping up enforcement of the boats that are currently being kept on the street and in people's driveways and whatnot? Because those are the obvious candidates for using a boat storage yard. And that may not be a question that you can answer, but perhaps it's one for the city manager.
Well, I'll start, and we do have a couple, there's probably 2 that I can think of right now of folks that are pushing the limits on storing their boats on the waterfront, and you've been down there, I'm sure you'd recognize the boats. There's a couple of them that are pushing the 72-hour limit, and we're with us in the police department, we're constantly tag teaming with each other, trying to keep those guys within the law and keep them from storing their boats on the waterfront. But yeah, I'll let city manager answer the bigger question of citywide.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Some of it comes down to a matter of resources, and we deal with code enforcement on a complaint basis at this point. So we certainly could look at a more proactive approach if we actually had the resource available for the community, maybe put warnings in those warnings include information about this option particularly those in more egregious situations.
Yeah, and I can think of a few where I've seen boats parked on the city streets for days on end. So I'm just curious because I know that we really want to have them stored elsewhere. So this seems like a way to encourage it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And I asked you also, will the Harbor Department assume all administrative costs, including cleaning, maintenance, security, everything? And this gets to the split between the general fund and the harbor.
Yes, that would be our intention. Obviously, building, constructing, maintaining. As I spoke with Councilman Makowiecki, we're not planning on putting a lot of improvements in this, so we're not going to need a lot of maintenance. But policing, our patrol staff, part of their morning rounds when we go check our slips and periodically go through town, we'll be going through that yard and checking for compliance with the regulations in there. Obviously, we may need PD if we have something egregious going on, but I don't anticipate that'll be happening, knock on wood. But by and large, we intend to adopt or take over all or maintain all maintenance and administrative costs.
And also, obviously, operation of it. So,
yes.
Yeah. The rate you suggested was actually more than the going rate. So are we somewhat confident that we're going to have a market for it, that there are people willing to pay $100 a month to store their boat?
Yes, I'm confident there will be a market out there. It's, part of the allure is the convenience of the proximity right there on the waterfront. So, beachfront properties at a premium. So, like I said, I think we can gauge it as we go and see how the turnout is, and then adjust the rate accordingly if we have to.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
All right, thanks. I have a question for Jen as far as the managing of the funds, and met with Jen as well. And so in the report, Eric, you were talking about it would go into an accumulation fund in the harbor fund, and then it would be kind of balanced out at the end. And I guess I wanted to talk about basically having a designated fund, a triangle lot parking fund, and basically just wanted to just check with Jen on that as far as the revenues would go into that, and then basically the operational portion of managing that would that would roll over to the harbor department at year end, and then we would establish an accumulation fund. So I just wanted to ask Jen for her comments on managing that type of arrangement.
I think if we could set up a separate fund and either transfer the money to the harbor fund for the operational costs, or set it up so any labor time is directly charged to the triangle fund, much like the wharf project through labor cost applied. And then rather than having maybe an accumulation fund, any excess revenues over expenditures would just remain as fund balance and available in that fund for allocation. That might be cleaner in terms of being able to track fully all the costs and the revenues coming in.
Because right now it's saying basically there's a hard number of $8,000, and if the actual billing for that was $8,010, it would just be zeroed out and billed appropriately, and you wouldn't have to worry about whether or not there was a negative or a positive going to the harbor fund, and whether or not they were needing to adjust that rate annually.
It might be cleaner and more helpful to capture the true costs that harbor's spending, and even any other department. If there's cleaning needs or something that Public Works needs to do, they could charge directly to that fund then.
Okay, and then, so Eric, as far as in the description of the fence, great to see the screening. I guess I would comment non-white, right? But then on the razor fencing, is that necessary?
Well, I think I put in there barbed wire or razor wire. Razor wire is a little more sinister looking, I think, and probably a little more obtrusive or intrusive. Typical barbed wire. I don't know how absolutely necessary it's going to be. It's definitely an impediment.
assuming most people keep their boats locked up, theft of something out of there, somebody's going to, if someone takes something off a boat, they're obviously going to have to try and climb up over a fence, which is going to be difficult enough. Wire on the top will make it even more difficult. It may not be necessary. Maybe just leave the wire, instead of, having it bent over at the top rung, you leave the last row of wire, sticking up so it's sort of sharp on the top. That could be enough of an impediment where you don't need barbed wire, yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether it was, barbed wire or the razor wire was a necessity at all, but, I know it's in the report, and you're looking through that. And then the other question I have is the wireless keypad for the future, and what's the expense on that to where it couldn't be done now?
I don't have numbers for that. I apologize. I look to that as a future item. It's not horribly expensive. Having looked into it for other applications on our waterfront, wireless, I'm probably going to do somewhat of a guesstimate and say $7,000-8,000.
Really?
Is that really
I'm
high?
Surprised.
Or is that really low?
I'm really surprised. You
think that's low?
No, actually, that's a little high, but I didn't have an idea on that. Okay.
But that's a guess to me.
So I guess the question would be, because it's based on the report, we're saying that we would have annually in excess of 14.5.
Yeah, that would be an estimate. Left over, and I'll admit, and I should have checked with Jennifer. Much like some of the things at the Harbor Patrol, and I come up with these crazy ideas and commit to things. Becca's the one that has to make those crazy dreams come true. I should have checked with Jennifer before when I came up with this scheme of how maybe we allocate the funds, and I'm sure she's going to have the best idea of what sort of funds we put them and how we allocate them. So, but yeah, that's our estimate of. I guess that would be sort of the pure profit at the end for excess revenues to go towards whatever we want to direct them to. It would be about $14,000.
And we've got the $15,000 in the harbor accumulation fund, and I guess my question would be, based on the numbers that we're looking at, if the first year in we're basically paying off the $15,000 and we have the excess of 14, is there something that we should be looking at? For instance, the keypad lock and how we do this, and do it right out of the gate and have this done now?
Well, I think we should probably wait in some time and see what kind of interest we have.
Okay.
Because I hate to put too much into it, and we don't have a lot of interest and end up putting a bunch of cost in. Obviously the fencing is going to be a sort of the sinking cost that we're going to have at the beginning, no matter what our interest is. And if we end up having low interest and we've got to wait a year to maybe adjust the master fee or adjust it in the springtime, I hate to put too much into it.
Okay. All right, those are all my questions. I'll move to public comment at this point. I don't have any speaker slips for this. Is there anybody who'd like to speak to this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and bring it back for discussion. Red, you want to start us off for discussion?
Yes, I am happy to proceed with the project as described in the staff report. I would also like to see the trash enclosures moved out of the paved parking lot, and Eric's recommendation to put it in the northwest corner of the triangle lot seems workable for now. And I would like to stop pursuing any movement of the proposed movement of the Harbor Festival equipment.
Okay. Matt?
I also am in support of this item, Eric's recommendations, and the suggestion by Red moving forward with the trash receptacles. So no, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Marlis?
Yes, I also concur. I think when we first heard this, the whole council was supportive of the concept, and I think Eric has been very receptive to our comments and brought back the changes that we asked for. I would also concur with he was persuasive in his logic on the revenue split, but if in the future we actually increase enforcement, I would like to see that revisited, because I would like to see if we're going to enforce on boats, I'd like to know that the general fund is reimbursed for that. And I would also like to see a report in, let's say, a year's time, just back to council, just so that we have a sense of how this did work out. So if I could add that to the recommendations or the motion, I'd like to do that, because I think it's an experiment in many respects, so I would like to see how it works.
Okay, great. I too would like to support staff recommendation on this, as well as Councilmember Davis's comments on moving the trash. I have some questions in that regard, and I would also like to get support as far as the way in which we account for it. I think we just agreed on an 80-20 split, but if I understand right, if we just use the funds to pay for the operations portion of this and establish a designated triangle lot, parking lot, then you have an accumulation fund, and does that eliminate the 80-20 split? It just means that you're paid the amount of operation costs for that?
Well, I think as if I'm reading it correctly, the 20% would go to the general fund, just go to the general fund. 80% go to our special fund, whatever we're going to call it, and then we can track our administrative costs, and it'll get pulled straight out of that, and then whatever projects we end up doing out of it would come out of that. So it would all just go into one, just call it the triangle lot fund. And then, like I say, the general fund would get us 20% and do with that what you want.
So the 80-20 split would be roughly the $8,000 for operation, 20% $9,000 for general fund, and then the $14,500 goes into an accumulation fund. In essence,
that would be my understanding of the direction you wanted to go. Yes.
Okay. I guess for $9,000, maybe that's the will of the council. I guess I'd be more inclined to just designate a triangle parking lot fund and have the operations portion go directly to the harbor department, and the rest of it go into an accumulation fund. Clearly, council can draw out of that or use it for general funds, but the idea would be, and this would be for council consideration, we just discussed some future items that had to do with moving power lines, moving other facilities in there. Basically, we would be able to establish an accumulation fund for that parking lot. I imagine moving the power lines to basically enhance the use of that. Whether or not it's a boat haul-out facility in the future is going to be an expense, and maybe we can start chipping away at that with those funds. You know, maybe I'm complicating things, but I just see it as a source of, we have the triangle parking lot, and we would have an accumulation fund to maintain it and improve it with the funds that are there. For $9,000 that are maybe going to the general fund, I just didn't. I mean, I'm not trying to pinch pennies, but I was just looking more towards a total accumulation fund on that, and then I'll look for some comments on that. And then the other is the razor wire or barbed wire fence, and if perhaps we do establish somewhat of an accumulation fund there after the first year, it's pretty clear we're going to have funds in there to be able to address the needs that we've learned, whether or not we need to put barbed wire up there and or a key lock system. So those are my thoughts on that, and I would just be interested in some feedback from council on those comments, and I'm ready to support it. It's just kind of maybe some nuts and bolts I was just throwing out there for council consideration.
Are you then proposing that the income and the expenses go into a triangle lot fund that is neither general fund nor harbor fund, but a special fund just for that lot.
Right.
Okay.
And it wouldn't prohibit council, if there was $50,000 in there, to say, hey, we've got a project nearby, we can draw on that. I think it just identifies that, hey, here's what's happening with the use from what we've started, and we can also use it as, well, do we want to continue enhancing this? We have a revenue source that we can use that from. It in a sense, is siloing things, and I know that's a term that we're all familiar with, but it's also one where I think if it's going directly into the general fund, we do lose sight of those things, and it's somewhat unique and designated, which was my only thought process, and I'm certainly entertaining my feedback from my colleagues.
To me, that's a very clean way of accounting for it, and I support that.
Okay, thanks.
I do have a question there for you, Jamie, because it does make a lot of sense. Would you like to separate, and go with me here for a second,
sure.
Because I know that in that specific geographic location, the harbor is going to be the area, the Embarcadero, the harbor department is going to be doing a lot of it. Are you suggesting that all of that money goes into one fund that would be, that silo that would be under the jurisdiction of the harbor? But then what happens with the general fund money of when the police do have to come, or the planning department has to work with that? Just because I am listening to Harbor Advisory Board and listening to Harbor, I know sometimes those sticking points get in the way of things. So could we, I like the idea of the fund, in putting into a fund the improvement fund for the triangle lot.
Or maintenance.
Or maintenance for the triangle lot. Could we, could we just put in there a flat percentage just automatically goes into the general fund for the city? And that way when those improvements come for that location, the harbor department doesn't necessarily have to go, or we don't have to, as council, have to determine at a later point the change between general fund and harbor. I'm sorry if I talked too much.
No, I think I understood you, but I was looking to Jen, because did you maybe have some thought on that? Because I'll just...
If a separate fund is set up, it might be a little bit more complicated if police is called out, for instance, but let's say there's a maintenance need down there and the consolidated maintenance crew is called down there to fix something. They can directly charge their time to that fund. So we wouldn't have to send revenues to the general fund. They would be able to charge directly to it, which would relieve the general fund of that time. Have to have a conversation with the police department on if they're able to, track their call-outs that way or not. And I don't know how many of those that it would be, if it's significant to capture. I think maybe the concept of the excess revenues over expenditures, and if you want to designate a certain amount at this point, whether it's 80% or what it is, or a markup on harbor in consideration for administering the program, that might be the conversation. But this would be a non-restricted fund, so it could be used for harbor needs, it could be used for general fund needs. It would basically be a fund of money that's available for the lot, the general fund, the harbor fund. There wouldn't be any legal restrictions as long as we make the harbor department whole for any services that they provide.
Okay. Marlis?
Yeah, so where would this fund show up in our budget? Would it come under harbor? Would it be grouped under the harbor department because it's mostly operated by harbor? Or would it be completely separate?
I think it would be completely separate, kind of as one of those other funds. We have the Park in Lieu fund, Parking in Lieu fund, government impact fee funds. It's kind of the other funds section, and we call it Triangle Lot Fund.
Okay.
And I think you're envisioning, or what I'm hearing is maybe a little bit different verbiage, but one fund and not a triangle lot operating fund and an accumulation fund, but one fund, as there is excess revenues over expenditures that would sit in fund balance and be available to allocate in the future.
Right. So if Eric needed money for something other than the triangle lot, would he be allowed to ask for some of those revenues from that fund?
Absolutely. There wouldn't be a restriction on what it could be used for.
Okay. And so we would then expect to be tracking all of the general fund expenditures also. I mean, employees that are included in the general fund, any work they would do would be charged to that fund also.
That we would try to capture that. We can easily do that with Public Works, and we can see about with police.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. I think I understand.
Okay, great. Then I've got one more question to follow up on the moving the trash. Then, if we're going to move the trash over there, and that fence and everything was paid for by the people that are using it, is that what's going to happen now?
If that's your direction.
I think so, at least from my standpoint. I'd look for some other comments on that, but I think if there's ownership there, maybe there'd be a little bit more care involved. I know it's difficult in all the aspects of that, but I know there's other businesses on the waterfront that have to manage whether it's opening up and hauling that out. And I know, everybody's busy down there, but we could use a little bit of care in there. And those are at least my comments. I guess we should discuss whether or not we support that or not, or if we're going to use this accumulation fund to make that move. Matt?
Well, I 2 points. You're speaking to your point that you just spoke about, Jamie. I agree with that. I think moving that trash area to the northwest corner or thereabouts of that triangle lot area would make sense. I also would support having those businesses pay for those improvements. Back to the triangle lot fund in terms of who and what entity in the city would use that. I would like to point out that being on the harbor and being within the harbor fund, giving everything else on the Embarcadero with the lease sites and who would be using those slips up and down the Embarcadero, I hesitate to put all those monies into one account that then could be used in general fund and harbor fund simultaneously. I would like to keep it. I would think I promote it, keeping it separate, that 80% split being able to use for the harbor department, simply because of its proximity and who's going to be managing the harbor department, where it's at, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so do we have support on moving the trash and how that works? And then I guess the question is there support? How is that being paid for? And I think you were saying that you'd support the people that are using it to be paying for it. So we have consensus on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm thinking that $32 a month isn't even sufficient for what the city's doing, but because these are exceptions, and I'm not sure we should be giving very many exceptions like that, frankly. I would like this resolved in a nicer way in the future.
Yeah.
But, short term, I'm willing to, if they're willing to pay, to move it, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just want to clarify on the moving the trash enclosure. So we've got the one big long one that's got Harbor Hut and GAFCO. There's the other one next to it that we did another agreement for Franklin Lola's.
Mm-hmm.
So all of them, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
And if I recall right, there are some clauses in the Franklin Lola's, if it's done within a certain year, that there's a percentage of payback on that as kind of some equitability. So I understand that, and I think it's worthwhile knowing that we did approve it that way. So that's fair. So, and then as far as the siloing of the funds, I'm sure we can come to a conclusion on that. Personally, at the end of the year, if it's one particular fund, when it comes to us in a budget time, if it's one triangle parking lot fund, if there's anything within the general fund or harbor, certainly we could allocate funds in that direction. But from a clean standpoint, it was just like everything generated goes in there, and then at the end of the year or the beginning of the fiscal year, we can make those determinations where we might want to appropriate funds if Eric, as an example, had a particular project. But those are my comments. We can belabor this, and I just want to make sure that if we establish the triangle lot parking lot, how we want to do it. And if it's, I'm in favor of just, 100% goes in the accumulation fund. We zero things out, and it's unrestricted. We can designate it. If there was a particular project needed, we could do that. And it seems like we could account for maintenance crews that are going down there, which is also pretty good to be able to draw on those. Unless there's any
I
other
support
comments.
that.
Okay. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
And clearly, a year from now, at the end of this, we can modify that or change it all together. But I think might be a good way to start to kind of see where we're going on that. It just if you're okay, okay. So we got some consensus on that. So we got consensus on the accumulation fund sort of things, and the screening, and then the fencing and barbed wire. Did we get consensus on how we're addressing the barbed wire? Yes or no?
I think so. I think no barbed wire for starters, and I think it's a good idea to maybe just see how it goes, and one, depending on what our usage is, and two, if there is a problem with thievery or break-ins or burglary, then maybe we take it to the next step and just see how it goes.
Yeah, and maybe that's the advantage of having an accumulation fund. We can do that and know that we have some funds to do it. Okay. So I take a motion on this. If there's someone who wants to make a motion.
Mr. Mayor, if I
Yes, sir.
could, if I could just interject, I wanted to clarify that the proposed rules and regulations, agreement, and policy and procedures, it's attachments 1 through 3, they do say that they're drafts, and I would suggest that the council would approve those subject to approval as deformed by city attorney in consultation with the harbor director and consistent with the direction received at tonight's meeting.
Okay, so let's revisit that in a minute.
Sure.
So we can maybe do, so we can make a motion to approve staff recommendation for the Triangle parking lot with the expenditure of $15,000, designating an accumulation fund that will be managed through the budget process, and it would be a designated fund. We also agreed on to move the trash enclosures and for those to be paid for by the user. And I'll stop there on the motion because we might need to. So let's just do that. So the motion would be to support staff recommendation to move the trash enclosure and for the users to pay for the improvement, and then we can make and also approve the $15,000 allocated to do this.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so we have the motion, and the motion by Marlis, second by Red, and I think we're going to sequence this a little bit. Any further discussion on that? None? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries 4-0-1. The next part of that is the description that you made a minute ago, Chris.
Yes, in the staff report, there's 4 attachments. 3 of them, 1 through 3, are proposed draft triangle lot dry storage rules and regulations. Second one is proposed draft triangle lot dry storage agreement terms and conditions. And third one is proposed draft triangle lot dry storage facility policies and procedures. Insofar as these are drafts, and now that we've received some direction tonight from council, I would suggest that council approve these subject to approval as deformed by city attorney in consultation with the harbor director and consistent with tonight's direction.
I think that's a so moved motion. Okay. So motion by Mr. Irons, second by Mr. Makwetsky, or any further discussion? None? So just to be clear, motion was per city attorney's discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries 4-0-1. What else?
Yep.
Number 3 is the master fee schedule. And we approve the new master fee schedule of $100 a month for the trailer boat dry storage in the Triangle Lock parking lot.
And Marla's suggestion that we receive a report back in 1 year.
That would be the motion, if you want to state that.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion for a new master lease schedule item of $100 a month for the boat dry storage in the Triangle parking lot and a report back in year end or your calendar year.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Motion by Mr. Davis, second by Ms. McPherson. Any further discussion? That was a so moved, was it not?
Right.
Okay, all right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries 401. Any other comments on this? None? Can we take a short recess?
Yes.
Okay, we'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everyone. Next item up, item C2, approval of issuance of a request for proposals for Morro Bay Marine Services Facility and Boatyard Financial Feasibility Study, and affirmation of financial commitment to complete it. Eric, that was a mouthful, but maybe you can do it better. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Arns. So as you stated, we're looking at RFP, request for proposals, issuance for consultant services for a financial feasibility study for our potential boatyard marine services facility, not to be confused with just the dry boat storage yard, but a real boatyard to haul boats and do normal work on them, as boatyards often do. So our purpose here is to obtain council approval for issuance of that RFP for preparation of that financial feasibility study, reaffirm council's financial commitment to it, and obtain council input on the draft RFP document if necessary. So we're recommending approving issuance of this RFP and council's previous financial commitment approval of that as well. Alternatives to not putting out this RFP, council could direct us to pursue other steps as necessary or as deemed appropriate, or cease work on the boatyard project altogether. From a fiscal standpoint, we believe the study will run somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 to $50,000. $40,576 is currently in the approved FY 18-19 capital project budget list under boat repair storage yard line item. We've had that line item there for probably 20 plus years and been paying down or spending down on a little bit in the last 5 years on a couple of projects, but still have that money there available. And if additional funding is required, if we get back, assuming we put this proposal out and we get responses back and then they're over the budgeted amount that we have, $40,576, we would bring it back. Depending on what it is, obviously if it's an extremely big number, we may have second thoughts with some sticker shock, but we'd bring it back for budget adjustment if we needed to when we went for award of the RFP contract. Hopefully we don't have to go there. A fair amount of background on this item. Since the city acquired that Triangle parking lot back in 2014, it's had reinvigorated the Harbor Advisory Board and interest in a full-service boatyard. The previous work done in the 90s was down at the Coleman Beach area and then along the Dirt Embarcadero towards the creek. That's where the previous work had been done on that. But a lot of problems with that property and ownerships and costs killed that project a good decade and a half ago. We've got a Harbor Advisory Board, and the Harbor Advisory Board Ad Hoc Committee has been very active on this project for a couple, 3 years now. We commissioned a Morro Bay Boatyard haul-out facility market demand analysis by Lisa Wise Consulting, which concluded we'd have about a $1.1 million to $2.3 million in revenues a year coming from this potential yard. Back in 2015, December, we had RRM Design Group do sort of what we call the mini master planning of that yard, and it was really an exercise to see if the boatyard as we envisioned it, the Maritime Museum as they envisioned building out to full scale, and public parking and dry storage could all fit into that Triangle parking lot and sort of reconfigure all the parking in the Front Street area. And so they came up with option A and option B on that, which we brought to council for consideration as well, or for review. And then council authorization to seek financial feasibility study. In March 2016, council authorized up to $50,000. But then we stepped back a second and did an intern step of putting out an RFQ, request for qualifications, to see if we had any interest in firms coming forward to see if they were interested in building a boatyard. Unfortunately, we did have interest from a couple boatyard operators and a couple engineering firms. None of them proposed. Primarily, their reasons for not proposing was that they didn't think there was enough infrastructure and city commitment to the project. Putting in a proposal for an RFQ of the nature we had was fairly involved and was probably going to be fairly costly for companies to put that together, and I think they just looked at the cost and didn't see enough potential movement forward on it or past movement forward on it, so they didn't, nobody applied for that, nobody put in for that. And then over the past year or so, late 2017, 2018, the Ad Hoc Committee and the HAB has been working on a draft RFP for full financial feasibility study services. Took a lot of good input from the HAB and from the Ad Hoc Committee, and have a good draft document in front of you now for consideration. So full financial feasibility is the logical next step to determine really if a boatyard, as we envision it, about a 10, 12 space yard in the triangle lot, full service and self-service, is financially feasible in this town with the market we have and the costs and everything that it would entail to put something together. Attachment 1 to our staff report is a draft RFP for steady services. I blatantly stole Ms. Calloway's RFP format from the cost allocation and fee services study. I think it was a good format she had, so I took that and adopted it wholeheartedly. So that's why you might recognize how it's set up. Some of the highlights of the RFP are the objective, obviously, is to receive proposals for consultant services. The schedule, if we put it out here in the next week or so, proposal will be due towards the end of November, the 30th, is a good timeline. Consideration of contract award by the City Council on December 11th, 2018, and then estimate and study completion about June of 2019. The scope of the work, services would obviously be the necessary work to complete a comprehensive feasibility study. The project scope itself, in other words, what is the consultant going to be on the hook to do? Meet and work with city staff and the ad hoc committee to vet questions and issues and do necessary interviews with city staff and other interested stakeholders. Utilize past studies and data, the Lisa Wise consulting document, RRM design, and other data we have available. Prepare revenue and expense projections based on their expertise and what they know about the market. And then evaluate financial feasibility under 3 possible models. Model number 1 would be private sector design, construction, and operation, meaning open it up to the private sector. Here's a blank parking lot. Here's where you can put your haul out. You design it. You pay for it. You build it. You operate it. Is it financially feasible under those parameters? Option 2 would be a public-private model of design, construction, operation, meaning public, some degree of public involvement and public funding. What I would envision there, and I think is going to be absolutely critically necessary, is that the public contribution is going to be grant funding to put in as much infrastructure as we can to keep the cost down as much as possible, and then turning over not necessarily a turnkey site, but a site that's got a lot of the hardscape and infrastructure in place for an operator to come in. And then a pure public design construction operation, meaning the city takes it on. In recent conversations with some council folks, some of you all, that's going to be a tough nut to crack from a pure management and capacity standpoint. My department, as you know, we're already up to our eyeballs in projects and enterprises we're undertaking. Public Works is probably up a little deeper with the wharf and other projects they're doing, so it would probably be something we would consult out. So really the public-private design and construction operation model is probably the most logical one. And so pure public may be something we could drop off the list altogether and maybe save a little cost on the study. So the consultant wouldn't have to work on that. And then prepare the study and present it to the Harbor Advisory Board, and then the Harbor Advisory Board would take it and make any recommendations to the City Council. Consultant selection would be by an evaluation committee, and selection recommendation of a consultant based on, and this is draft, what the consultant's qualifications are, 35%. Reputation and demonstration of integrity and competence, 20%, proposed fees and charges, 35%, and ability to provide services in a timely manner and accept the city's standard consultant template and insurance requirements, 10%. Interviews may be conducted with prospective firms if required, and the winning consultant recommendation will be made to the City Council from the selection committee based on the best value evaluation, meaning not just sole who's the lowest cost, but also other factors that we factored in that I just spoke of with the different percentages. And then not in the staff report or necessarily currently structured this way, but if council is going to be approving of this, I would ask that we allow staff to restructure the RFP in a sort of a phased manner and do it in sort of a fatal flaws analysis as you go approach, meaning there's certain things that may kill this project altogether from a cost standpoint and a feasibility standpoint. and environmental compliance and permitting may be some of those deal killers that we really ought to be looking at up front, because if they're insurmountable, there's no sense going through and doing the rest of it. So I would put the RFP, kind of restructure it, and put it in a phased approach to where we look at the biggest hurdles, the biggest fatal flaws right up at the beginning. And if we don't get over those fatal flaws and don't get past them, we don't go any further with the financial feasibility study. And then kind of do it from a priority standpoint on down. And again, sort of a fatal flaws approach before moving on to the next step would be how I would recraft the financial feasibility. So in conclusion, significant work, body of work, both print material and advisory board and ad hoc committee work has been done with the city to date. The full financial feasibility study will definitively determine if this full-service boatyard really is financially feasible and would work in this town. We're pretty isolated. We've got a pretty small market. Unlike Southern California, the Bay Area, we don't have thousands of boats to draw on. So really, we need to see if this is financially feasible to see if we're going to commit to it. The haul-out area would be the Beach Street Slips area, between Stack's Wine Bar and the South T Pier would be the most logical place. One of the big impediments, one of the big fatal flaws, and speaking to another boatyard area operator up in the Bay Area very recently is operation of that haul-out machine through public parking lots and across public streets, and is that even coverable by insurance? Maybe the insurance companies won't even touch it, or the insurance rates would be so high it may not be feasible to do it. So those are some of the fatal flaws we need to look at pretty early on. If council approves and we complete the study, next steps will include going back to the Harbor Advisory Board and the ad hoc committee with the study results, with ultimate recommendation going to the City Council, and City Council ultimately deciding if and what we want to do and take any further actions. Obviously, funding's the big one, and that's the big thing we'd have to be looking at and figuring out where funding may come from. So we'd anticipate summer, fall, autumn of 2019 for this study evaluation and recommendation of next steps. Questions? Comments?
All right, Eric, thanks for that. Start off with a question. Marlis, you want to start off with questions on this one?
Sure. Well, I've asked a number of these questions. I think Eric and I had a really good discussion about this issue. And I really was trying to pursue what we already knew about the likelihood of a project like this succeeding in our community. So the first question I have is, you mentioned in the staff report that a boatyard is closed and we only have one left, and can you tell us a little bit about why the one that closed, and what we know about the reasons?
Sure, Councilwoman McPherson. So the yard that we do have in town, it's down on 230-something Main Street, down on the what's classically called the Meyer property. Small little boatyard in a residential neighborhood between two houses. Was built probably 60-plus years ago. Its main problem is it can operate, as I think you heard earlier this evening from Ms. Pandora Nash-Carner, it's very limited on what it can do. Typically one boat at a time, maybe two if they're two small boats. The problem the yard has now is it was designed to be able to swing to the north and put boats, and then swing to the south and put boats. They can no longer swing to the south because that was invading over onto the adjacent property owner's property, and so they've lost the ability to go over to the south. So now they're only in the north, which very much limits their ability to operate. The owners there are concerned about the age of that crane and what it can do, although it was built in a time when things were built very robustly and is probably pretty darn strong. I mean, it's lasted this long, it's been maintained, but they're concerned about it, and for them to continue on as a boatyard, there's going to be a financial investment commitment that they're going to have to make. I've recently been contacted and met with another one of the sons of the brothers that own that property and made that property. He lives in Florida. They are still interested in operating a yard there, but again, they really need to investigate the costs, and they're going to kind of double back on that and see what it would take to build a new crane there, because if they build it today with the space restriction that they have, it really ought to be placed on the southern boundary of the property and be able to take the whole property and use it. So they're still interested. The closure rumors we've heard, the boatyard operator there now, the fellow that they have operating it, he's getting out of the boatyard operating business. I don't think they're closing it down just to purely close it down because they want to get out of it. Like I said, they're still interested, but Joe, the operator there, is interested in getting out, so I think that's the rumor we're hearing, that he's closing down. I don't know if they're going to bring somebody else in to operate on an interim basis or not. So that's kind of that yard in a nutshell, if that answers your question.
And you indicated that there was a financial feasibility study conducted in the early 2000s, and it found that it was not financially feasible in Morro Bay. So can you tell me what's changed since then and now that would possibly make it more feasible today than it was then?
So that study was done by Marshall and Associates back, I think, in 1999. There were property acquisition costs and issues. So the haul out would have been kind of in the Coleman Beach or Mother's Beach area, across Embarcadero, and then down the dirt extension of an Embarcadero, and it would be along the eastern side of the road, between the road and the Dynegy property, the power plant property. The big challenges there were we didn't own all the property back then. We've since acquired some of that property, but not all of it. So back then there were costs to property acquisition. There were some property issues that we couldn't get ownership of. There were, I think, some power plant easement issues in there. So there are complicated property issues. The habitat, the dune area was basically, I think, either in the process or recently deemed ESHA, and so there were very large environmental problems with that property from the standpoint of it being declared ESHA, which had cost and mitigation issues that factored in. And the market, I don't know what market analysis, they did do a market analysis. I don't know how much of a factor Port San Luis was at that time, or drawing from other areas was at that time, but it had a larger element to it in terms of marine services facility. It didn't just have a boatyard; it had other ancillary buildings and businesses, and cost involved with that. Dry storage lot, I think, was the one thing that it identified as the one moneymaker. If you did a dry storage lot all by itself, but in sum total, the costs were just too high. It wasn't financially infeasible by hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was not a slim margin, but it wasn't a huge margin, so that's where that factored in. But I think, like I say, it was mostly cost issues and acquisition issues with the land that killed that.
Okay. And in the staff report, you indicated that in 2016, you and the Harbor Advisory Board and the Ad Hoc Committee were engaged with a private development interest with respect to a boatyard, but it didn't pan out. Can you tell us what happened there?
So we had a private citizen who'd had experience in construction and construction management and project development, commercial project development. He too had been sort of parallel pursuing a boatyard in Morro Bay, not from a permitting or standpoint, but he had an interest in it. And then when we acquired that property and started more work on it, he came forward with interest in developing this yard. I could almost say if the RFQ had gone out when he first approached us, he probably would have submitted something in the RFQ. He was interested in that fashion, of sort of throwing his hat in the ring. So we began working with him and sort of vetting out what his vision on it was. He was fairly well tied to the feasibility of it being tied to the Maritime Museum and making it a joint project. While the Maritime Museum folks had some interest in that, they did not want to tie themselves to that because they were moving forward on their own project, on their own timeline, and didn't want to tie to it. So I think that was one of the big feasibility killers from his standpoint, is because he saw it as one bigger visionary project that ought to go together. And so we vetted that out about as far as we could, and then there was really no more work to be done. He didn't propose any further in terms of saying, yes, I'll develop it, and let's start negotiating on it.
So do you think if we were to pursue this feasibility study, that the people that showed some interest in the RFQ, a sufficient amount of interest, that if it turned out that it was financially feasible, there might be a possibility of moving forward? I'm just curious.
I would think so, and I would hope so, because any prospective boatyard builder is going to need to do, they're going to do their own, business pro forma and financial feasibility on their own. Obviously, being on the inside, they might have a little easier time at it from the standpoint of they know the costs and whatnot, and wouldn't have to go seek that out like a consultant would. But they're going to have to do that. So if they've got all that front loaded and believe in the study and how it was conducted and are faithful in the numbers, I suspect that would definitely help prospective folks' interest if it penciled out in the positive from the feasibility study.
Okay. And one of the findings in the Lisa Wise study was that the boatyards that seemed to be the most profitable were the ones that had the larger hoists and were able to handle bigger, heavier boats. Is that something that would be considered here in our community, or are we really talking about trying to just service our local community?
Primarily, and because of mainly our isolation, it would be the local community and what we could draw from Port St. Louis. As I think you heard from Dana McClish earlier, there's folks that go north and south and need services en route. And there's a lot of folks that do travel to go to their favorite yards. Our commercial fishermen especially that can't get service here, they've got their sort of their pet yards they like to go to. Hopefully all of our commercial fishermen would remain here if we had a full service yard, but you're going to attract some from the outside. But the Lisa Wise consulting study didn't really assume any particular number because it's really unknown what kind of interest you would get. Did that answer your question? I think I got way sidetracked on that.
Pretty much.
I was going to go further with...
I guess the issue is, would we want to consider it, or maybe I should say that in the study, would they consider that might be a factor that would affect financial feasibility?
Oh, so the larger boats. So that's...
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me. I didn't go there, but and we did talk about that yesterday. There is if you're in San Francisco or the LA area or Orange County area, obviously you've got thousands upon thousands of boats to draw on, and it's a whole different demographic, a whole different ballgame. At some point, especially here, there's going to be a point of diminishing returns to where you may think, I want to build something that can service 100 tons. Well, really, what are you going to get? Who's going to come here for 100 tons? Port St. Louis is a 65-ton hoist. 70, 75 is probably about the maximum we would really need here because the amount of cost may not be necessarily that much more, although there is a factor to that because you've got space requirement needs and your machine needs to be bigger and your armoring of the streets and pathways needs to be bigger. So there's obviously a bigger cost there, but once you start getting to boats of that size, those sorts of folks are the kind of folks that are demanding full service, high-end full service, and they need engine outfitters and riggers and specialized welders and if you think of big high-dollar research boats or commercial service boats, and there's not going to be a huge demand for that. So the typical boat owner, for sailboats and even our bigger commercial fishing boats here, they don't need those kind of service providers. And so there's going to be nothing to retain those service providers because if you get one or two of those big 100-ton boats per year, that's not enough to keep those guys in town. And those big boats would have to call in outside help. And those outside help typically aren't going to travel because it's just too costly. And they're going to go to the yards that have that. So there's going to be diminishing return per point, and it doesn't make sense to go really, really big because I don't think the market would be there. But financial feasibility study would be aimed at looking at where that point might be, where that tipping point might be.
Okay, but it would also include an analysis of that type of service level versus a do-it-yourself service level.
Yes, I mean we're pretty darn sure we need a do-it-yourself combination yard with full service, just because so many people want to do it yourself.
Right. Okay. And the trends identified by in Lisa Wise's study, are those continuing? So they're still growing and demand, and the fishing industry is still viable, and there's still enough demand in this community?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, as you heard in the Harbor Advisory Board interviews this evening from Bob Fowler, the fishing community has taken some major hits over the last decade, but they've recovered. There's been a lot of regulation out there. The biomass and the ecosystem, for the most part, everything's under management plans, that things are recovering. Sure, there's still problems, but the fishing industry is doing pretty good. And recreational fishing, for a number of years, recreational fishing season, the rockfish season, which is sort of our bread and butter for the recreational folks, we were down to a 4 or maybe 5 month season because they closed it throughout the winter and a good part of the spring. We're back up to a 9-month season, and so that's changed because the regulations are working and the fish are coming back, and so that's coming back. So we are seeing an upswing in fishing. Environmental regulations are getting more strict. I think you heard some commentary earlier tonight, and maybe it's the Harbor Advisory Board approvals either this evening. Folks putting their boats over on the beach, that used to be fairly common. It's not illegal. It's not strictly in compliance with our Clean Marina certification. It's not something we encourage. If people want to do that, we make darn sure they're not cleaning, scraping, painting. If they're replacing a through hole, they've got a problem. We allow it, but it's on a very limited basis. But boat work is becoming much more environmentally restricted, and so it's the in your water stuff, the in the water stuff, even in the water, topside work is getting harder and harder to do in the water because of environmental regulations. So it's making folks go to the yard more often than not now.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Marlos. Matt?
Eric, you brought up some points. You talked about the scheduling of this feasibility study moving forward, and especially doing it in parts to find out when there might be some sort of blockade. Looking ahead, if this were approved tonight and then comes back and goes to Harbor and comes back to council here in the next few months, what do you envision in terms of that schedule moving forward with the study? Is it by month? Would you go a few months in terms of the big ticket items?
Well, I think putting out the RFP and getting responses back, I think we can stick to the existing schedule and award it, come December. The phased approach, it's a good point. I hadn't factored that into the initial schedule that I looked at. If we did a phased approach, obviously when we get to the end of a phase, we're going to want to take an evaluation look at that, and that could entail Harbor Advisory Board, ad hoc, City Council, just depends on what the study says and how that phase went. So, yeah, that will kick us back in time to a certain degree, certainly.
And then also, you made a comment about the National Estuary Program and their support of this of boatyard haul-out facility. And why would that be?
Well, again, because of environmental compliance and pollution, they want to see as much boat work done as possible in a yard where it's controlled and not on the water where it's less controlled. That's one of their primary interests. The other is in, as I think Dana brought up earlier, McClish, is derelict boats. Right now, if we have a boat that has a problem, and maybe not even a derelict boat, but any old boat that springs some big hole or has some major problem, is in danger of sinking, unless the yard down at 235 Main is available and can handle that boat, we're out of luck getting it out of the water, and it takes extraordinary effort sometimes to keep them above water. And then some of the derelict ones, it might enable us, if the yard had space, to be able to just pull them out of the water and stick them off in a corner and get them out of the water and decrease the danger to the environment.
Thank you. That's all my questions. All right, great. Brad?
Thank you for a very thorough coverage. You said that the primary moneymaker for a boatyard is dry storage. Is the triangle lot large enough to support working facilities and enough storage space to make it profitable?
So dry storage is definitely, as I think I stated earlier, a cash cow. It's minimum development, fairly good return. I don't know that it would be, and if I made the statement that it's the primary moneymaker, it is definitely a good money-making component of any boatyard, but it's not the only money-making component. Obviously, the yard itself needs to be solvent. I don't think we would be able to rely on, unless we had, storage space for a few hundred boats. I don't think you'd be able to subsidize a boatyard with dry storage because we just don't have the space. The RRM design charrette we undertook to sort of see what fit in, our 10 to 12 space yard, about 50 dry trailer parking spaces, and the Maritime Museum all did fit into that lot, using between the existing wall and Embarcadero Road, where the tree line is through there. It used all that and maximized the use of that space, and then got pretty creative with some of the public parking. But yes, it all did fit in there. It was a tight squeeze, but it definitely had about a 50 space dry boat storage element to it as well.
If we needed to add some more storage space by expanding out into the parking lot, is that something that would be feasible?
Into the Front Street parking lot?
Yeah.
It might get a little wonky in that you got the Maritime Museum, and if they fill out between where the Chumash or the Selenian folks are going to go towards the trash can enclosure area. And as we know, that lot's starting to get pretty darn full with lots of different uses, so I think that would be a tough one.
Okay. That's all my questions.
I think in the staff report, I don't know, if you've got it online, I know mine printed very strange. I got a very big blow-up of like 10 cars, and that was it. If you're online, in the staff report, one of the attachments was the RRM design group. I think it was attachment 6 to the RFP document itself. Shows that layout of what RRM did. It may have it's printed really wonky on mine.
All right. Okay. All right, good. Thanks for all the questions. Thanks for the report. I don't have any questions. I think all the questions for me have been answered. And having the time that we've been working on this, I'm ready to get into discussion. I don't know how many speaker slips for this item. And with that, I'll close public comment and bring it back to council for discussion. Matt, you want to start us off in discussion?
Looking back in the last number of years, 3 or 4 years, talking about this and the importance, and this goes back to the late 90s, and actually, we have now a shopping center called the Boatyard in Morro Bay. That used to be a boatyard, and that used to haul out our commercial fishing boats. Then we had the small boat yard in the back. So we definitely need this, and looking at this feasibility study, we've gone back and forth as a council. There's a number of different parts of this that I totally support, from the Beach Street, Measure D, part of the north part of the Embarcadero. This would, in terms of keeping a working waterfront, this would be integral to what we're talking about. And I do believe the plan, and just looking at some of the RRM pictures, working together with the Maritime Museum, this could be a great thing to do. It is a feasibility study. It is $40,000, but however, as Eric's talking about it, I think going into the phased approach and doing that responsibly, bringing it back, I think that is a way to do it, and put this out there and see if it can work. So I'm in support of it.
Great. Red?
I too support it, although I came to the meeting tonight not in support. But I was swayed, one, by Eric's thoughtful approach to staging it, to look at the limiting factors, and two, public comment was so overwhelmingly positive and compelling that I now support.
Great, Red. Marlos?
Thank you. Yeah, I started out fairly ambivalent about the project as well, partly because of how long it's been going on and the idea that if in fact it was financially feasible, something would have happened by now. And so it's hard to think that you want to spend more money on something like that. But on the other hand, I recognize that it is a priority for the boating and the fishing community here. And I think we need to settle it once and for all, and hopefully this study will do that. So I am supporting moving forward with it, and I appreciate that Eric was willing to take into account some of our comments about not necessarily spending all the money if we don't have to. So this staged approach, I think, is a very good one. I liked it a lot, and I would just like to, my comment would be to focus on a public-private partnership. I don't think that a private one is going to work because nobody's going to come in and build all of the infrastructure, and I don't think the city is going to do that. So I would limit the study to just a public-private partnership, and I think that might save some money because I think that's the only viable approach. And I would like to make sure that they really look at all of the funding sources, especially those available to the public, and includes some financial data on other working boatyards, haul-outs in communities or harbors that are somewhat similar to ours in size, and the various service levels, make sure that there's cost-benefit analysis of that. So those are my comments.
Okay, I too am in support of this. With some regret that initially we were to a point where we were going to go out to RFQ on this as the story's been told, and we, I think thoughtfully at the time that, okay, well, we might have an opportunity to take another look at it, and it, process sometimes takes longer, but that's what it is. I do support moving forward. I do believe that we are in a unique situation. There may be some that thinks this might not be the right spot for it, but actually I think it could very well be the spot for it. And since we have it, I think we owe it to do it. We have explored this for many years, not just this, but a boatyard in general. Whether or not it was out of Coleman Beach and, as was explained, the Dynegy property in that area there. I'm glad to see the fatal flaws portion of this be identified. I would ask Morris to consider that we should do the entire feasibility study so we get the full picture of what the private sector would look like. I think we owe it to the community to know, are we limiting ourselves and are we missing out on that opportunity? I think it's something that will be identified in the fatal flaws portion of it, in the phased portion, and I do support moving forward on this with the fatal flaws. Phased approach, Eric, thanks for that. But I would like to see us go through the entire feasibility study, both private and public and private. It'll paint a clear picture for all of us to understand. And if it comes to a point where we have to question ourselves later, we'll have that answer for us. That's the only thing I have on that. So unless there's any other discussion around the part of how we do the feasibility, whether it's public or private, I'm willing to move forward as recommended through the fatal flaws, including both private and public-private.
I could agree with you, especially since presumably we'll get some quotes back on what it's going to cost. And at that point, we might have to figure out how we have to limit the study, and that may be the time to do it. So I'm fine with that.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. Any other comments? What else do you need from us, Eric?
Approval.
You ready for a motion? Matt, you want to make a motion? Matt?
Sure.
I move that we approve the issuance of a request for proposals for the preparation of the Morro Bay Marine Services Facility and Boatyard Financial Feasibility Study. Anything else we want to add to that? Oh, and do we need to put that in there, Eric? Do you think using a staged approach?
The phased approach?
Yeah, because I'm going to recraft the RFP document.
Okay, so I'd like to that motion to approve the issuance of the request for proposals for the Marine Services Facility Boatyard Financial Feasibility Study in a phased approach. Yes. To identify fatal flaws.
Second.
Okay.
Motion by Mr. Makwetsky, second by Ms. McPherson. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries 401. Real quick question before we go on this. So we didn't put anything on this as far as the phased approach. We were estimating 40 to 50,000, so we didn't necessarily put anything in the motion as far as capping it or limiting the cost or if it goes over. So I just want to make sure where we're at on that.
And my plan on that would be, we've got the money, it's in the approved budget at 40,500 and change. If the response that we want to go with ends up being more than that, or if they're all more than that, again, unless it's a huge heck of a lot more, I would bring back, when we come back for approval of the contractor, whoever we're going to go with, let's say it comes in at $52,000, I would come back at the same time with assuming we want to go with that, a recommendation for a request to increase the budget by whatever amount we need to increase it by.
So there's to put a do not exceed at this point as far as where we're going with this?
I don't think we need it because we've already got a budget that's $40,576. There's our do not exceed right there. If I need more, I'll have to come ask for it, and I'll do that when we go to award, when we get to that point. I think.
Any
that's the
thoughts
way
on
to
that
go.
from council?
That makes sense.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
All right, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or any more motions or anything on that? Okay, with that, thank you, Eric. That concludes item C2. Congratulations. Thanks, Matt and the Harbor Advisory Board and the Ad Hoc Committee for working so diligently on that. Next up, item C3, discussion and direction on process for developing fiscal emergency sustainability plan and financial policies.
I will lead that off. Thank you, Mayor, Council Members, Scott Collins, City Manager, and we have a couple items grouped together here to discuss, and I'll just intro it real quick. As Council is made very clear to the public and to staff and just kind of in all of our deliberations, financial sustainability is a supreme priority and goal for the city moving forward. Without sustainability, without that base foundation, we really can't achieve any of the other goals. And that's why it's listed as the number one. And so what we have here tonight is look at two components, at least the initial discussion. One is the fiscal emergency plan, if you will. What do we do in the instances of unforeseen economic or other financial peril hits the city when we're not anticipating it to occur, and what procedures do we put in place to ensure that we can weather those storms that we weren't anticipating? And then the second and more proactive is looking at our long-term sustainability plan. And Council has provided some guidance on this, both reaffirming this as a goal and priority for 2018, but also adding some more action items to consider as we move forward into the year. So you see the City Council goal. Of course, our finance director took it to the next level and researched kind of other cities and looking at the Government Finance Officers Association as a guide for how to move forward, and looking at best practices in the financial world. Has come up with some recommendations for council to consider. In addition, we do have some audit findings about some of our processes and policies that need some tidying up. So all those are kind of the reasons why we're bringing this forward tonight. Again, I mentioned the goal of achieving financial and economic sustainability. This is on the financial side. Ultimately, the first objective is to look at financial sustainability on both sides of the house, the cost reductions that we can secure, and also what we can do to enhance our revenues through various opportunities. The next slide includes those various action items that relate to tonight's item. The first being kind of cost control measures. We did establish a balanced budget for this year, thanks to the leadership of the CFAC, finance staff, and City Council. But we do have more work to do moving forward, including looking at all of our expenditures very closely, working with the community, working with our employee budget group as well. Action B is to develop the internal emergency plan, which we'll discuss tonight a bit more. And then action D is to evaluate opportunities for expanded revenue sources, which we'll get into a little bit later. And next slide, I think, is Jen's, but I'll just tee it off. Like I said, she took it to the next level. We were just kind of looking at these little things in pieces, and felt perhaps going to a higher level, 30,000 foot, establishing a fiscal resiliency plan, and this comes out of her work in previous organizations and what GFOA recommends, and so she'll go into a little more detail about that and how that can serve as a foundation and framework for financial policies and our short-term emergency plan. Take it away, Jen.
Thank you. As Scott mentioned, this is not only a council goal, but was recently brought up and requested to be agendized. So we're excited to bring this forward and kind of start the process moving on both the resiliency and the financial policies piece. And thinking about how we wanted to frame the work, and it can be quite an undertaking, so separate it into pretty doable chunks to develop a work product and see progress moving forward. We did do some research into other cities that have completed sustainability plans, and looked to GFOA, which again is the Government Finance Officers Association. And they provide a lot of guidance and best practices on several different areas. So one of them being fiscal resiliency plans, and they really outline 4 key traits to those plans in terms of accepting uncertainty and embracing change. It's one of the things, in addition to taxes, that we know will always exist. Building systems that can withstand shocks and stresses, thinking broadly about what influences our financial health, and evolving to adapt to those changes. And they kind of have this graphic as a visual model of what a resiliency plan would encompass. So when we think about a resiliency plan for Morro Bay and for our city, we're kind of recommending that we break it into 2 parts. The first being a short-term fiscal emergency plan, which would really be kind of a reactive plan, would identify when there's triggers, economic triggers, that would indicate that we need some fiscal first aid to take place in kind of an immediate reaction. The second being more of a long-term plan, and that being a fiscal sustainability plan, and that's more proactive in the sense that we really are thinking long-term, thinking of, diversification of our revenue sources, expenditures, alternative service models, and kind of narrowing down what the council and community is willing to consider and look at and focus on in the long term. So in terms of the fiscal emergency plan, this was the item that was most recently discussed and asked to be agendized, and it makes sense to kind of deal with that at first, especially since it is kind of that, fiscal first aid trigger, if you will, and when there's adverse fiscal circumstances. So we're really going to look at, or recommend looking at, what those economic triggers would be, and then what some mitigation strategies would be. We would recommend we consider all funds, not just the general fund, which tends to be a highlight in some of these cases, but if we're having economic struggles, that would impact all of our funds in terms of the revenues that come in. Water consumption likely will go down. Harbor may experience less revenues, would experience less revenues as they receive gross rents. So it makes sense to look at this all-encompassing and include all of our funds. We have outlined a pretty aggressive time frame, and we're really looking for council direction on this. And we want to make sure we're all on the same page as what expectations are and what we can accomplish. And again, sorting them out into kind of the short-term and long-term plans will help us do that and help us come up with a product at the end. So for the fiscal emergency plan, that short-term strategy, we're recommending that we re-engage with our Employee Budget Advisory Committee, which I realize is confusing because we already have EBAC, so we'll change that to Budget Group or Advisory Group and rephrase that. Also, we want to engage with proposing to engage with the CFAC committee on what makes sense for triggers. and bring those back to the council for discussion at the end of September. And so we can come up with some consensus on what those triggers may be. And we'll have recommendations both from the staff level, the employee group level, and CFAC. And we'll provide that to the council at the end of September. We've also included a follow-up discussion with our employee group on mitigation strategies. So once we've identified what those triggers are, the next step is to think about what potential mitigation strategies would be. So work with our employee group on what those may be. We've included an option for a community meeting in mid-October, really looking for some council discussion on that in particular, and if that's needed, given the fact that there's 2 opportunities at CFAC and additional opportunities at the council to receive public input, but we have included it at this point. We'll go back to CFAC again for the mitigation strategies, come to council 2 additional times, one for discussion of those mitigation strategies, and then by the end of the year, an adoption of that short-term fiscal emergency plan. Then beginning in January, we'll have a new council seated, and we'll come back with a new proposal for the long-term sustainability plan, which we did provide 2 examples, City of Novato and Dublin. I think you can tell from both of those examples that that's a longer process to go through. I think Novato's took 24 months, if I remember correctly, 18 or 24 months. There's more engagement with the community in those processes, and we'd have a much longer timeline. So it makes sense to do that when the new council is seated at the beginning of the year. That would be our recommendation. So I thought maybe we could pause and just kind of talk about this piece of the staff proposal and get some feedback on the time frame and the kind of plan for addressing the fiscal emergency component of our resiliency plan.
Any questions at this point? Matt, you want to start off?
One thing that comes to mind, Jen, is this. It seems to me too rushed, considering what we have on our agendas in the next 4 or 5 months. And so, looking at it, do you have a reply to that? Is it?
If you follow the news, there's some anticipation of a recession maybe coming in the next year, and so I think from that vantage point, we thought this would be the one to try to tick off as soon as possible, though. Certainly with a lot of input from our advisory body that kind of plays into this, as well as sufficient time for council to consider that, and also maybe the community through that community meeting. Of course, CFAC and council meetings are open to the public as well, so we acknowledge that. But again, trying to anticipate that there could be a change in the weather and on the economy, we want to be prepared for that.
No, you're absolutely right. And looking at it, it makes, as I'm reading it, it's like, wow, these would be wonderful to have in place. It makes total sense, and having it done ahead of time. I totally agree with you, especially with the prognosis that we've been given the last couple of years. But in terms of getting those other groups, CFAC involved, in terms of council as well, I totally agree with you. I just question the timing.
It's an aggressive timeline. I think it's doable, and especially doable to get a, form of a plan down, get some triggers. There's nothing preventing us from going back and adding, mitigation strategies if we want to at a later date, or even additional triggers. But I think it's a good, doable first step.
Red?
I like aggressive timelines because I think it builds momentum and motivation. And if staff is confident that this is doable, then I'm all for it.
Marlis?
That was the first question I posed to Jen, was can this really be achieved? Because it is aggressive. I obviously think it's a great idea, and I guess my only question is, can we really meet all of these, and is there room in our council agendas on these dates? And I assume you've checked that.
The mayor and I and Dana have worked really closely on the next several months of council meetings, and as the mayor identified in the last council meeting, there may be need for special council meetings to kind of get at some of the, there's a lot of high priority issues that we're grappling with, but
Right.
we think it can fit. But I'll leave it up to the mayor to kind of fill in the blanks if I miss anything. Yeah.
Go ahead. Are you done?
I just one other quick question that I didn't mention before, but I'm curious to know if you could just give us an example of some of the kinds of triggers that might just, I know that that's the first stage, but I'm sure you've given it to some thought, just the kinds of things that might trigger a short-term plan. I take it like a recession would, but...
A recession would. I think we'd try to define a set period of time for maybe revenues coming in under budget or under expectations, and whether we group, some of the discussion would be, is that revenues as a total? Is that a specific subset of revenues like TOT and sales tax? It's,
Right.
20% less than we had forecasted or anticipated. One of the things we'll have to analyze and examine is what the trends are, because we know that not all revenues come in, 1/12 each of the year.
Right.
So we do some analysis of that, make some predictions, and if we're not meeting those, then that would trigger us coming back to council, recognizing that the trigger has been met, and these were mitigation strategies identified, and a discussion about, do you want to impose one of these, and which one would it be? Okay. That's kind of what we're envisioning at this point.
Okay, good. No, thank you. Thank you for the further explanation. I appreciate it.
Okay. So we're at the schedule portion of this for questions on that.
Yes.
I guess I'm going to do some question and comments as I go through these, because I appreciate the comments about the aggressiveness of the time schedule. But I looked at that, and Jen and Scott both, thanks for the discussion as we work through some of my questions on this. When I looked at the schedule, particularly it was outlined the general fund reserve and other funds that's scheduled for September 25th, kind of like the first one. I just want to throw out, I have some questions and comments for council to consider that, and staff feedback. And that seems like a logical one to kick off. I know the accounting and financial reporting is the second one in October.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but did you want to talk about the policies as a whole, or we were kind of on the fiscal emergency plan, so slide 8.
Slide 8? Okay,
yeah.
Sorry about that.
I'm sorry, I think we were just going a little forward here, so we can move into financial policies if you'd like.
On slide 8, okay, I'll hold those then, Jen.
Okay.
Thanks for reeling me in on that. Thank you.
If there's any feedback or comments on the community meeting piece of the fiscal emergency plan, that would be helpful. If there are none, we'd just proceed with the time frame that we've outlined.
I guess the only other question I have, and this is what I was kind of jumping to, but we have this schedule laid out, and considering our agendas and the times we have, it would be for council to consider amending our council calendar to allow for a second meeting in November. And that would allow for a regular city council meeting on that day. That might be another item to discuss, but it would unfold perhaps a different schedule on the fiscal emergency plan, is one thought, but something I think needs discussion at some point as we get to that.
Yeah. My only comment is on the community meeting. My concern is that if we provide too many opportunities, then the community isn't going to come out, or we make them come out 3 times. So I think we might want to just talk about that a little bit. I mean, they can come to a CFAC meeting to express opinions, and they can come to a council meeting. Do we want to also have a community meeting? And if so, it would need to be differently organized, I'm assuming, where we would seek input or provide strategies and try to get their reaction to it. So that's the only thing I would mention, is they are coming one on top of another, and is it reasonable to ask the community to come out 3 times like that? I don't know the answer.
it's an interesting one, but after reading the Novato staff report and the series of meetings they had month in, month out, it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
All right, let's go with
Well,
it.
that was just a comment on that.
I think if, because what we're going to bring back for the fiscal emergency plan, that short-term plan is going to be much more condensed than the Novato plan. That Novato plan will really, and the Dublin one, be more mirrored in our long-term fiscal sustainability plan. If the concern is the community may not come out to multiple number of meetings, you would probably get more value out of it from the long-term sustainability perspective rather than this kind of shorter term. These are our quick triggers that are going to indicate we need to do something, and what is that something going to be? Whereas that long-term piece, again, is looking at alternative revenue sources, alternative service model delivery, those kind of things. So that's really where we would hope to get some significant community involvement and feedback so we can design that plan around the goals of the community.
Any more thoughts?
I think I would favor having the community participate at the advisory level rather than having a dedicated community meeting for the short-term mitigation.
Any comments?
I think I would tend to agree with that, especially since they're like less than a week apart. So I think if we advertise the CFAC meeting and make it clear what they're going to be discussing and they want citizen input on it, make them just come once to provide their comments. That would be my thought.
Well, and to build with that, looking at the schedule here in terms of doing that, and then running the commentaries that you would receive on those different dates that you would be able to publicize also, that people would know, or residents would know. And then in terms of these dates, we could, in some future date, in terms of the accumulation of all those ideas, put them out there in one sense so we can keep a running commentary and then at one point ultimately discuss it.
Okay, so I'm hearing, did I interrupt you? No. Okay, I'm hearing no community, dedicated community meeting, but we'll do that on the advisory level with CFAC and the city council meetings. Definitely keep a record of all the comments we receive to be able to share with the community and give them an opportunity to provide feedback on that. And should additional meetings be added later in the year, we'll come back maybe with a revised schedule so that adoption doesn't necessarily happen on December 11th, which might be a difficult meeting date anyways. So we'll work towards the end of that to clean that up a little bit, maybe add something to the October 23rd meeting, and then November 13th for adoption, or that second meeting in November.
So you're asking, at this point, you're asking for a solid calendar as you leave tonight, or is that something that we're agreeing in the general direction?
General direction.
Okay, good. All right. I think we're all in agreement of that. Good.
Oh, I had AGP maybe can fix the PowerPoint for us, and while they're doing that, we can move on to that second component of the financial policies. This again is something that will directly help us resolve one of the audit issues that we've had for the past 2 years about having financial policies in place. We have some. We don't have a comprehensive listing of those. So to be able to demonstrate to the auditors that we're making progress on that would be great. We looked at GFOA again for best practices as they provide a great outline of about 15 different policy areas to be addressed. And then financial policies in and of themselves are really a component of achieving fiscal resiliency. So these kind of go hand in hand and make sense to do on correlating paths. For the financial policies, GFOA identified, we discussed the 7 benefits of having them in terms of institutionalizing good financial management practices, clarifying the intent for financial management, defining boundaries, supporting good bond ratings, the better policies that we have to show bonding agencies, the better the ratings will be, and it will reduce our overall interest expenses if we need to take out long-term debt. Promote long-term thinking and strategic thinking, gives staff guidance, and mitigates risks to financial conditions. And so again, GFOA had 15 policy areas that they identified. We outlined those in the staff report, and we've kind of taken those and grouped them into areas that we thought made sense, and have outlined a schedule for when we would come back with either revised policies to what we currently have, and that was the case with our first proposal to come on September 25th for general fund reserves and other reserves. We do have a general fund emergency reserve policy. We'd likely come back with some maybe modifications or edits to that, but it wouldn't be a new policy. We just adopted a policy recently for our water and sewer enterprise funds. We'll probably propose adding something for the harbor enterprise fund into that. So that might be a new component to that, but again, just a revised policy. And then GFOA offers guidance into the individual areas. So we'd certainly take those under advisement, and to the extent that maybe they have advisory memos, we would maybe add those to our packet as well. The next option is October 9th. We'd like to bring back the accounting and financial reporting and procurement policies. We put these second because our auditors are coming in mid-October, so the timing to be able to show them that we have had a discussion about these and are moving forward with adopting them would be helpful. Again, we do have some policies, even out of the discussion tonight with creating a triangle lot fund, that might be appropriate to include a policy on what that fund is for, that it's available for, harbor use, general fund use, something like that. So we would bring that back with part of this. There's use of our purchasing cards. We have a policy on that, but again, revising maybe or updating that. Purchase orders. We are now using our purchase order module in our finance system on a limited test basis at this point, but we are using that, and it's, we're developing on a day basis the process for that and policies behind doing that, and what should be included with the purchase order in terms of a signed contract or insurance documents, so we could memorialize all of that as well. On November 13th, we're proposing long-term financial planning, the balanced budget and operating budget policies, and that's really just to kind of lead into the 1920 budget adoption season. December 11th, risk management and internal controls. And then as we move into January, into the new calendar year, we have revenues and expenditure policies, in February, capital and economic development policies, and then in March, debt, investment, and grant policies. And in March, I envision, we have an investment policy that we update regularly. We have a debt policy that we may have some minor modifications to. And we don't have a ton of grant policies at this point, so we may bring forward some grant policies that would help define our process going forward. So again, this is a pretty aggressive timeline as well. I expect that some of these may have to come back, that we'll get feedback from the council or direction on changes and re-agendize them to come back for further discussion. So these may get moved back a little bit, but kind of as a grouping and concept, wanted to get feedback and make sure we were all, again, on the same page as we move forward with kind of this undertaking and completing this assignment.
Okay, ready? It's almost where I was at. Sorry about that. So I'll wait. And Red, do you want to start off?
Sure, I'm happy with this. I think it's brilliant. Thank you.
Matt?
Well, I really, looking at your plan and looking at all these things and going forward, and then, and looking at your timeline being done next spring, I want to, let's see it happen.
Sure.
Totally.
Marlis?
Well, my only question to Jen was, do you have the staff to actually get this done? And I think that's the critical thing, because it's wonderful what you have planned, and we're thrilled. So.
Yeah, so if I could just, elaborate, we're going to come back with as many of the policies as we can. There's, again, GFOA advisories that maybe will go in there rather than a specific policy, but it would guide best practices, and this will be a start. So there's nothing to say that, in a year we can't come back and add a new, accounting policy, but it will be a start to get something down and moving forward, and be able to add to that supplemental section of our budget, too, that points to our budget policies and our practices. So.
Okay. All right. I guess this is kind of where I was starting off on some of my comments. The September 25th for the general fund emergency reserves, and some of the order, and this was back where we had some of our conversations, and looking at the long-term financial planning in November, and we're still going into December, then January, February, and March. And I guess some of my comments would be, perhaps the long-term financial planning should come in January with a newly seated council. Well, it's long-term financial planning. It might be more prudent for a newly seated council to be participating on that. So I'm looking for, I know we had some conversations on that. I just want to make sure both council and feedback from you, Jen, and staff on the viability of that. It's just those first four and how those are organized that I had questions about, and specifically rolling the long term perhaps into the January. I think it's still questionable whether or not the December 11th, where we are on that meeting, but those are the only two I can think of, and maybe rolling the risk management up, and maybe moving the long-term financial planning into a newly seated council discussion. Those were my only thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can. September 25th for the general fund reserves, again, because we have well-defined policies already, and then working on doing the short-term fiscal emergency plan. From a workload perspective, I'd like to keep that one there. I would recommend that. Again, the October 9th one, I'd like to keep that one there due to the auditors coming on board, so that makes sense. But certainly can see a new seated council maybe wanting to being appropriate for them to weigh in on that long-term financial planning and structurally balanced budget. Moving that to January is in time for our budget process, so I have no problem with that. And if we want to move risk management and internal controls to November 13th, and then maybe take a break in December and move the long-term planning to that first meeting in January, that would work fine for our time frame.
Any comments from council on that? Are you? Okay.
No, I think, Jamie, by pointing that out, especially taking into consideration the new council to be seated, I think that's a really responsible way in terms of letting them start off, especially with the goals starting in January. I think that's a really good move.
Okay, great. Marlos, good?
I'm good.
Okay. Okay, anything else, Jen?
Nope, that's it. And it's not an action item, so I think I got direction that we need.
So, do you feel like we got enough direction on that?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Just a couple of real quick comments then, as far as putting all this together, Jen and your team and staff. It's been a couple of budgets ago that we had, we were using our 10-year budgeting forecasting tool, and at that time we were looking at recessions possibly and the PERS bubble, and we made some short-term changes to our general fund emergency reserve policy. You and I have had that conversation, and we had some conversations about the risk management, but it may have been appropriate at the time, but this plan that we're looking at tonight is far and above where we were then. And so I think we're really on a good, strong path for addressing the short term and the long term. But it's a big contrast in how we approach things basically 2 budget cycles ago, and addressing things that with the tool we had, we did okay. But I just want to say thanks, because this is it's a very well thought out plan. And if anybody else, there are viewing audience there, there's a couple of staff reports from Novato and Dublin, and have to speak to that as well, because the stories in those two cities, to compare what we're doing, is relevant to many of, if not all of the cities in California, as we're dealing with PERS, as we're dealing with infrastructure, and how we're able to balance our budgets and move forward. And so I would encourage folks, if they're out there listening and they have access to our city website or other, to maybe take a look at that, because it really does tell a story that we're wrestling with from our own city here in Morro Bay. In addition to a water reclamation facility project, there's other cities that are taking on huge things, and Nevada was just an amazing staff report on that. So I just want to speak to that for those that are still up listening, and just pay compliments to you, Jen, and your staff for all the work. With that, unless there's other comments.
And then also, I'd like to point out also in your presentation tonight with the OpenGov, all of these things going together very seamlessly. I think moving together, the transparency that you're creating, I think folks watching, and certainly us up here, we're very appreciative of it. And then I know that our residents are definitely going to be appreciating this with our big ticket items, as Jamie brought up, wastewater, our general plan, our LCP. These are huge, and for this plan to be coming out simultaneously. I know we're all questioning you with the timeline, but to do this is so wonderful, so thank you very much.
Mayor, I'm not sure if you did call for public comment. Just wanted to throw it out there. Sorry.
Thanks for reminding me that. And it's only 9:40, so I shouldn't be able to miss that, but thank you. So with that, I'll open up for public comment. Seeing none, I'll close public comment and come back to council. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. That's how it works sometimes. Okay. And with that, our item C3 is concluded. We're all good? Okay. Item C3 is concluded, and we move on to council declaration of future agenda items. And I just want to bring up the city council meeting calendar and bring that up to have council discuss amending our city council meeting schedule to allow the second meeting in November to be put back on our calendar. It just puts it back on there. We can cancel it if needed, but based on some of the things we've been looking at, I just wanted us to bring that back, and it officially puts it on our regular city council meeting instead of a special meeting. And there's some relevance to that as far as taking action on a regular city council meeting versus a special meeting. Part of the staff report prompted the conversation, as well as the ongoing list of items that were on our agenda calendar, and just trying to get through things. So I would ask to bring that back, and that would come back in a staff report where we could discuss that, and whether or not it's a full business item or on consent. That's totally up to how we want to move forward, but just need some consensus on that.
Sure.
We got a 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, all right, we got
Right. And that is not the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. It's the week after.
Week after. Yes, thank you. Thanks. But it would basically, we're bringing back our meeting calendar to address that one meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Pardon me? Extra pay. Extra pay. That's a different meeting. That's a different agenda item.
I just have a question about, I think that I asked to have agendized the issue of moving the building, the Tagnazzini 3 building. Are we going to be able to meet that deadline of that was just announced tonight of yes, October
we're looking.
15th.
We'll update the future agenda list. We had a really good discussion this Monday about September, October, and November, and that's where this discussion came up about the potential need for a second meeting in November. But yeah, we anticipate with a special meeting probably under our belt in September, we'd be able to get to that item in time.
All right, good. Thank you.
As long as we get a proposal from the interested group, that would be helpful.
Oh, all right. Okay. I'll pass that on.
Okay, unless there's anything else, then our next regular meeting will be held on Tuesday, September 11th, 2018 at 6 p.m. Right here at the Veterans Memorial Hall.